The net had been hanging over the training hall doors for 7 months. It was mine. Everyone in that room knew it was mine, which was the entire point of hanging it up there. My name is Halvir. The class cut it down to halv in my second week, and in my language halv is the word for half. I have never worked out whether they knew that or found it by accident. Either way, they kept it. Dael was doing the speech again. He did it twice a week, always in the 10 minutes before the doors opened, always with one hand raised at my net so nobody in the room had to guess what he meant. The class laughed in the same 3 places, and I had started mouthing along in the middle one. The phone went off while he was still enjoying himself. I did not need to look at it. She sends one message before she leaves and one when she is parked, and she is always 20 minutes early because she has never once been late for anything in her life, including me. I looked anyway. Parked. Take your time. Where he comes from, Dael said, they catch them. He pointed up. They do not rank. They do not close gates. They wait for something to come out of the ground, and then they throw a bag over it. He is right about that, and it is the only true sentence in the whole speech, and he has never once noticed that he says it. I have thrown a bag over 11 things. 9 of them lived. He came to the end, and the end was always the same, because he never finished a threat himself. If Half forgets what he is, he said, my mother will remind him. Somebody else had to land it for him, and it was always her. Pim was in the doorway by then with her arms folded, waiting for him to be done, because it was Monday, and Monday belongs to the list. She keeps 31 names in her head and reads them out from memory in the hall. She has never once brought a paper version, and I do not believe one exists. She also gets a name wrong on purpose every week. Always a different one. Always somewhere in the middle where nobody who is drifting will catch it. Then she watches to see who corrects her. That week it was a boy called Renner and she called him Renna, and 4 people opened their mouths and she wrote all 4 of them down behind her eyes. She read down through the 20s without hurrying. Then she said my name, or the half of it they use, and she said the number, and the number was the same one it had been since the week I arrived. 31st out of 31. My sister sits her entrance in 3 weeks, and the 2 of us are in this country on my place in that list. I have never once managed to say that sentence out loud at a speed that made it sound survivable. So I did what I do on Mondays. I stood at the back in my yard coveralls because I had come off the night shift at 6 and there had been no reason to change into anything better, and I did arithmetic instead of listening. 2 minutes from the visitor row to those doors, 7 months of my net hanging over them, and she has excellent eyesight. One thing has to be said before it happens, because it is the only reason any of this held together for as long as it did. Nobody in that room had ever seen her. Not her face, not her car, not the back of her head in a corridor. Her son had been threatening people with her for 7 months, twice a week in that room. She had never once walked in through the front of that building. The doors came open at 9 and stayed open, which is how the cold got in, and the cold is the only reason anybody looked up at all. 31 people turned round to find out who had let the winter into the room. A woman came in with car keys in her right hand and stopped 4 steps inside. That is exactly where you stop if you have never been in a room before and do not intend to stay in it. She was not dressed like anybody who works at an academy. Her steps are all one length, every one of them. I did not know yet that people who have watched her work can hear that in a corridor and get out of the way. 31 students turned round. I watched the room decide in about a second that she was somebody's mother come in to complain about a grade. Dael did not turn round. He had turned round first before anybody, and then he had gone very still and put his hand down. I did not understand one thing about that for another 5 days. She found me at the back. She did not raise her voice because she does not, and she said one word, and the word was Halvir, all of it with the stress where it belongs. I had been in that country 2 years, and she was the only one in it who had ever done that on the first attempt. The class heard it. That is the thing I had not planned for and could not have stopped. 31 people heard a strange adult say a name they had spent a year and a half filing down and heard her say all of it, easily, the way you say a word you have said many times. Somebody near the front repeated it under his breath, testing it, and got it wrong. Pim said nothing at all, which for Pim is a great deal. Dael still had not spoken. 6 minutes by the clock over the doors, from the end of his speech to the thing I am about to tell you. I have thought about those 6 minutes more than about most of what happened to me that year. Then the brace clicked in the corridor and everything stopped being anybody's plan. Hesta teaches our class. She has a brace on her left hand and it clicks when she closes it, and the sound arrives about 2 seconds before she does. That is the only warning anybody gets. 11 years ago, she was struck off the roll. She has never said one word to us about it, and she does not need to, because she says everything else instead, at volume, in corridors, to children. She came through the far door, pushing a trolley with a crate on it, and she did not slow down. Doors stay shut, she said. Nobody signs out and nobody steps out. This is an examination, and it started when I came in. Somebody said they had a class at past. Hesta said they had a class right now. The brace clicked, and that was the discussion. I looked at the doorway. She was still standing in it, and she was 20 minutes early, and she had nowhere to be for 20 minutes. There was no version of the next hour in which she left that building before finding out what was in the crate. She is not capable of it. I have watched her miss a meal to see the end of a fight between 2 dogs. Hesta put the trolley in the middle of the floor and told them the examination out loud, because she always does. There is a young one in here, she said. It came out of the second gate on the ridge on Friday, and it has been fed twice. It is going to leave that crate in about a minute, she said. I am not going to tell you what it is, and I am not going to tell you what it does, and if you have to ask me either of those, you have already failed. 30 ranked students move into the shape they are taught. It is a good shape. 2 on the flanks, 1 high, the rest at range, and a lane left open behind the thing so it has somewhere to go that is not into people. I have watched them build that shape about 400 times, and they are genuinely good at it. I stayed where I was, because I am not in it. There is no place in that shape for a person with no number. The first time I tried to stand in one, Hesta moved me out of it by the collar without breaking her sentence. The crate came open on its own, from the inside, and that told me what was in it before I saw any of it. Nothing that hunts pushes a lid. A thing that hunts waits behind the lid for you to lift it. It came out low and fast and went straight for the wall and not for the people. It hit the wall, turned, ran along it, hit the corner. Then it did the thing that emptied that room of everything it had been taught. Stopped dead, made itself small and screamed, and it kept screaming, and the sound of it came off the plaster and doubled. I have heard that noise on maybe 40 nights. It is not a hunting noise. Nothing that is about to come at you announces where it is standing first. The open lane was behind it. It did not want the lane. It wanted the corner, and it had the corner, and now 30 people with numbers were holding a shape that assumes the thing in the middle intends to move. A boy called Taro went in at range, correctly, by the book, and put a strike into the floor a stride short of it as a herd. That is the right move. It is the right move for something that hunts. Scream went up about an octave and it came off the wall at him. He got his arm up. It went through the guard and opened his forearm from the wrist to the elbow. Blood on an academy floor changes a room faster than anything else I have seen in this country. 30 children who have been told all their lives that the number protects them, watching it not protect Taro. Hesta did not move. People read that as cruelty and they are wrong, and I have never once heard her apologize for it. She had said it was an examination and she meant it, and she was going to be right about something before the hour was out. 2 more went in and the shape got worse. Somebody put a hard one into it and it did not go down, because there was not enough of the animal there to absorb a strike built for a full-grown one. The strike went past it and took a bite out of the plaster, and the noise of that made everything worse again. Dael did not go in. That belongs on the record without anything made of it. He is 18, he is not stupid, and he stayed on the flank where he had been put. I got about 6 steps in before anybody noticed I was moving. One of those steps was to pick up the water bucket by the door, which lives there for the floor and for nothing else. I will tell you exactly what I did, and it will not take long because there is nothing in it. I put the bucket down on its side 8 paces from the corner so that it rolled a quarter turn and stopped. Then I took my coveralls off from the waist up and let the empty sleeves hang, and I walked at it slowly and sideways with my shoulder leading and my eyes off it, and I made a low flat sound in my throat that my grandmother used to make at goats. It watched the bucket. They always watch the thing that moved last and has stopped. Everything with a spine wants to know what stopped. At 4 paces I stopped as well. I stood there like furniture and let it look at me for a count of about 30. Then I lowered myself slowly until I was smaller than it was and kept the sound going and laid the hanging sleeves on the floor between us. It came out of the corner. It came sideways with its weight back, ready to go the other way, and it put its head under the fabric, and I let it. Then I closed the arms over it, picked the whole thing up like laundry, put it in the crate and sat on the lid. Nobody made a sound for a long moment. Then somebody at the back laughed once. The way you laugh when your body has worked out, the emergency is over before your head has. Hesta came off the trolley, looked in through the grill, and said it to the whole room. A nesting juvenile, fed twice, so not hungry. It went to the wall and not to the people. Everything any of you did in the last 4 minutes, she said, was an answer to a question none of you asked. The trick takes 1 sentence, and it is not a trick. It was not attacking, it was cornered. And a cornered thing takes the first exit it is offered, so I offered it one that closed. The second sentence is the only one that is mine. In my country, you never learn what a thing is. You learn what it does when it is frightened, because that is the only condition you will ever meet one in. Taro was sitting against the wall holding his arm, and he said through his teeth that I could have said something. I told him I had been about to, and it had taken me a second. That is true, and it is also what is wrong with me. I hear a room in one language and answer it in another, and the translation costs me 1 second, and 1 second is long enough for a conversation to leave without me. Pim was up on the bench with her arms folded and her head on one side, doing the thing where her eyes go along a room counting people. Then she said it out loud on a Monday that had stopped being Monday. 27th, she said, and she said it to the room and not to me. She has never done that. The list is read once a week in the hall, and it does not get amended in a room with a bleeding boy in it. 4 people said what? She said it again, louder, and filed the 4 of them, 31st to 27th, in the time it takes to sit down on a crate lid. 4 places, and one of those places had been standing 8 feet away from me, and everybody in there could do that arithmetic without help. Hesta got her hand on my shoulder and turned me round to face them, which I did not want. Then she said the sentence she had been waiting 11 years to say to a room full of ranked children. I have been telling you for 4 terms, she said, that the number on a chest is a record of what a person has already done and not a description of what they can do. Then she said, this is Halv, and he cannot do anything at all, and he just did that. She meant it as the kindest thing she had ever said about me. It landed in that room as an announcement that the 31st had beaten every one of them, and it made all the weeks that followed harder, and she has never once understood that. Dael had not spoken. Not through the crate, Not through the blood, not through Pim. Hold on to that, because he had spoken every single day for 7 months. I looked at the doorway last. She was still in it with the keys in her hand and she had not come forward one step in 4 minutes. She did not put a hand out. She said nothing to Hesta about a bleeding student in an academy she could have closed that morning if she had felt like it. She looked at me and she said, "That is a good coat you have ruined." Then she went back out to the car and left me standing on the crate in front of all of them. She did nothing, and that has to be understood now because it keeps happening and it is the whole shape of her. She has never once solved a thing for me, not that morning and not on the worst night of that year either. What she does instead is different, and I had no word for it yet. She walked out under my net without looking up at it. She went past the flank where Dael was standing, close enough that her sleeve would have brushed his arm if he had not moved it, and she did not stop and she did not look at him. He watched her all the way to the doors. I saw him do it and I filed it as nothing. I assumed he was doing what the rest of them were doing, which was working out who she belonged to. He knew. He had known since she was 4 steps inside that room, and he had spent the whole examination standing on a flank deciding whether the rest of his life could survive him saying it out loud. One person in that building understood what had happened to him that morning, and it was not me. He went home that night to a house with a woman in it who had not mentioned where she had been, and he ate his dinner, and he said nothing. The car park was cold and she had the engine going and the passenger door open already, because she does that too. I got in with the coveralls over my arm and blood on one sleeve that was not mine. She asked what they keep in that crate. I said a juvenile. She said that whoever was running that room should not have had a juvenile in a crate on a floor with children standing on it. I said she was probably right, and I let the whole thing go past me like weather, and that is the moment if you want the moment. She thought the crate was work. She thought I had come in with the trolley because I was the only person in that building not dressed as a student, and because I look about 40 when I have been on nights. She has never in her life asked a person what they are. You do not ask. It is the rudest question in this country. You may ask what somebody earns and you may ask who their father was, and you do not ask a person their rank because the badge is on the chest or it is not, and reading it costs nothing. So she never asked, and I never said. I had 18 months of letters home getting shorter behind me, and I was not going to start with her. She said Nia had rung her twice about the entrance and that she had told her the same thing both times, which was that 14-year-olds who ring twice are already prepared. 3 weeks. My sister carries a dictionary with the corners folded over and reads it at meals the way other people read faces. Then she drove me to the yard, because Monday is a double, and I had 8 hours of it in front of me on 4 hours of sleep. She put me down at the gate and said my name again, Hole, and pulled out before I was through it. Booth had the board up when I came in. 420 is the bunker norm for a shift, and in 2 years, Booth has never said a sentence to me that did not have a weight somewhere in it. He said we were 40 under, the second bunker was low, and the ridge lot was coming in at 11. Then he said, you are on 3. 27th out of 31, 420 a shift. 3 weeks until my sister sat her entrance, and my net still up over those doors where it had hung since the second week of winter. Hesta caught the whole class in the north corridor on Tuesday, with a canvas bag on the floor and her back against the door they wanted. Nobody goes through, she said. There is a thing in that bag. The bag has been shut since 5 this morning. Tell me what it will do when I open it, and you may all go to your lesson. 29 of them stood in a corridor at 8:10 and looked at a bag. Somebody said it would come out fast. Somebody said it would go for the nearest heat. A girl at the front said, correctly, that they could not know without seeing it move. Then Hesta said my name, or the half of it she uses, and told me to tell them. That is what she does now. She had a thing she had been trying to prove for 11 years, and on Monday a boy with no number had proved it for her in 4 minutes, and she was never going to let go of that as long as I was in the building. I said the bag had not moved in the 4 minutes we had been standing there, so whatever was in it had already decided this was a burrow, and it would not come out at all unless somebody put a hand in. Hesta opened the bag. Nothing came out of the bag. We stood there for another 40 seconds, looking at a piece of canvas doing absolutely nothing at all, and it was, in its way, the worst thing she ever did to me. Then she said Dael by name, which she almost never does, and told him to get it out. He had to kneel down in front of 29 people and put his arm into a bag that he had just been told contained something that would only move if a hand went in. He did it, because refusing was worse. He came out with a handful of shallow bites and a face I had not seen on him before. A girl called Senate said, 27th, to nobody, the way you say the score at a match you are not playing in. That is how it goes here. Nobody announces that they have changed their mind about a person. They just say the new number out loud and let you work it out. I want to be honest about what that morning did, because it is the opposite of what it looks like. Hesta had just made me the reason 29 people were late, bitten and humiliated in a corridor. She thought she was defending me. By the end of the week she had done it 4 more times, and by the end of the month, there was not a person in that class who could hear my name without also hearing hers. Bites on his hand were shallow, and there were 6 of them, and they were on the back of the knuckles, which is where they go when a person puts a fist into a hole instead of a flat palm. He kept the hand in his pocket for 2 days. I would like to be able to tell you that I felt something about that. What I felt was the thing you feel when the weather turns against somebody who has been standing over you in it, and I will not dress it up, because you already know exactly what it feels like, and you would not believe me anyway. Stella Stroud found me on the stairs at lunch, which had never happened, because final years do not use those stairs, and there is no reason for one to be on them. She was slightly out of breath. She is always slightly out of breath. She trains between conversations, and she arrives at every conversation with about 40 seconds of her heart still going, which makes everything she says sound more urgent than it is. She is called 4 because she is 4th in this country, and she has been 2nd in this academy for 4 years. And if you want to understand her, you only need those 2 facts and the order I put them in. She said she had heard about the crate. I said it was a juvenile. She said she did not care what it was. She cared that 30 ranked students had stood in the shape while a boy with no badge sat on the lid, and that this had already been repeated in 3 places she goes. She said she had something for me, and she wanted something for it, and I should hear the something first, because it was better than I thought. Your sister sits her entrance in 3 weeks, she said. Entrances are not done by the academy. A rank examiner comes through, and it is a different one every month, and this month it is going to be Marlowe. I had never heard the name. She said, "No, you would not," and she took the towel off her neck and put it back on again, which is a thing she does when she has decided to say less than she came with. She said Marlowe does the badges herself, by hand, puts them on, takes them off. She said the second half of that sentence slower than the first half, and then she went back to being out of breath. What she wanted was Thursday. There is a final year session in the North Hall, and she wanted me standing in it, next to her, while she introduced me to people whose names I would not know. I said yes before I had worked out what I was saying yes to, which I would like to blame on the second I lose in translation, but that was not translation. That was a boy who wanted to be introduced to somebody. She said good, and went up the stairs 2 at a time, still talking, and the last thing she said was that I should wash the coveralls. The canteen is where this country does its actual work. 200 people in a room with 40 minutes and no ranks on the tables, and every re-rating that matters happens there about 9 minutes before it happens anywhere else. They had a name for my sister before she had been inside the building. She had come as far as the gate twice to wait for me, and that was enough. And by Tuesday lunch, it was in 3 separate conversations, and it was a joke about her dictionary, and it was not clever. I did not hit anybody. In my country, you hit last and you hit once, and a person who opens with his hands has already told you he had nothing else, so I have never once opened with mine. I went and stood at the end of Pim's table instead, which I had never done, and I waited until she looked up, and I said her name first before I said anything else. Something happened in her face that I did not understand for about 6 weeks. She has 31 names in her head, and she gives them out all day long, and almost nobody in that room ever comes to her and starts with hers. I said, my sister is called Naya. 2 letters, then 3. She sits her entrance on the 22nd, and she is 14, and she reads a dictionary at meals. Put her fork down. Is she on my list? She said, and when I said no, she said, why are you telling me then? Because in 3 weeks she will be, I said, and I would rather you had it right the first time than have to unlearn something. Pim said the name back to me. She got it right, obviously, because she gets everything right the first time and then wrongs one of them on purpose later to see who is awake. Then she said it again louder to her own table, and it went out across that room in the time it takes to pass a jug. The other name died that afternoon. It was not that anybody decided to stop. Pim had not picked it up, and if Pim does not pick a thing up, it does not exist by Friday. That is all the power there is in that room, and it took me a year and a half to see where it was sitting. It is not in the badges. It is in one girl with a fork in her hand deciding which of 2 words the room is going to be using at 4 o'clock. Dael had made that name. He made it at the gate on Monday when Nia came to wait for me, and he had been running it for a day and a half, and it went into the ground without anybody even arguing with him. He came for me on Thursday morning, which was earlier than I expected, and he did it in the training hall in front of Hesta, which was cleverer than I expected. He said, since we are all learning so much from the netmaker, let us have a pairing. Him and me, on the floor, first fall. And then, because he cannot help himself, he said, and afterwards my mother can say what a pairing with him is worth. I said no. I said it flat and straight away, without the second, and it is the one occasion in my life when losing that second would have done me a favor, because a man who takes a moment before he refuses looks like a man weighing something. That was worse. That is the thing about a room like that. Losing in front of it costs you a week, and refusing in front of it costs you the year, and I could feel the number going backwards while I stood there being sensible. Hesta let it run for about 9 seconds, and then made it an examination, because that is her answer to everything and because it let her be the person who decided rather than the person who watched. So I said I would take the pairing with one condition, and I said it fast, before the second could get away from me. No strikes, and we do it with the lamps off. Room laughed. Dael laughed longest, which was a mistake, and he took it in front of everybody before Hesta had finished asking whether he accepted. There are no windows in the West Training Hall. That is not a detail I noticed on Thursday. That is a thing I had known since my second week, because the West Hall is where they put me when the class does live work, and somebody has to be somewhere else. Hesta killed the lamps. It was not dim. It was the kind of dark where you lose the difference between your eyes being open and shut, and it took about 4 seconds for 30 voices to turn into one very quiet room. I have worked 8-hour shifts in a bunker yard where the lamps go at the top of every hour and stay gone for as long as it takes Booth to walk out to the box. 2 years of that. You stop using your eyes in the second month because they lie to you and you learn to go by the floor. I heard him move twice, and both times he was reaching for where he had last seen me. He kept doing it. He is 18 and he is quick, and he has been quick in lit rooms his entire life. I sat down, flat on the floor, legs out, hands on my knees, breathing through my mouth. He went over me at a run about half a minute later and took the bench with his hip, and the noise that came out of the dog then was the whole class understanding what had happened before the lamps were back. First of all, I never touched him. None of it is clever. He was hunting a man standing up because a man standing up is the only thing he has ever been shown, and I have spent 2 years on floors, and a floor is not a disadvantage if you already live on it. Hesta got the lamps up. Dael was on one knee against the bench with his hand out flat on the floorboards, and he was looking for me, and I was 3 meters away sitting down like something waiting for a bus. 27th, said Senet, in exactly the tone she had used on Tuesday, and then a boy at the back said, no, and the room went quiet in a new way, because saying no to a number out loud is not a small thing here. Pim was on the bench again. She did not amend it. She said the list is read on Mondays, and she said it in a voice that meant she had already amended it privately and was making the rest of them wait for it, which is her entire personality expressed as an administrative decision. Dael said nothing at all on the way out, second time in 4 days. I did not have the sense to be frightened of that yet. The yard takes the ridge lot at 11, and the ridge lot that week was heavy, and Booth met me at the weighbridge with the board already chalked. Booth says the norm for a shift more often than he says any person's name, and in 2 years I have never heard him mention weather, family, gates, ranks, the academy, or anything that has happened in the world beyond the second bunker. He said 460 tonight. Ridge lot came in wet. Wet is heavy and heavy is slow, and you are on 3 with the long hook. I asked him once whether he had ever wanted to be ranked. He looked at me a moment, and then he said the second bunker takes 11 tons and it had been done in a shift twice. That was the answer. I have thought about it more than most answers I have been given. Nia came to the gate at midnight with the dictionary under her arm because she had finished it again and wanted the other one, and because she does not sleep either. She said the girls at the gate had been calling her something on Monday and it had stopped. I said I knew. She asked what I had done about it, and I said nothing, and she looked at me for a while and said, you did something. I asked her a thing I had been avoiding for 18 months, which was whether anybody at home had written to her. She said yes, and I asked what they asked about, and she said you. They paid for my place here, and my parents did not, and they paid all of it. 61 households put in what they had, twice, because the first amount was not enough, and they did it because a country with nothing in it decided it would like to have one person with a number. I have been at the bottom of a list of 31 for a year and a half, and I have not been able to put that in a letter, so the letters got shorter, and then they got further apart, and my sister came out here partly because nobody at home believed the short ones anymore. She said, you are 27th now. I said, how do you know that? She said the gate girls talk, and they talk loudly, and then she went home to the room over the shop with somebody else's dictionary. Breen picked me up at 6 in the morning at the end of the double, which is a thing she started doing in the spring without ever asking whether I wanted it. She had coffee in the holder, and she did not ask how the shift went because she does not ask questions with an obvious shape. She said she had spent the evening standing outside a door in her own house. There is a room in that house that used to be an office, she said, and it belonged to a man who has not lived there in 6 years, and it still has his chair in it and his coats behind the door. I asked why she did not go in and take the coats out. She said because her son thinks of it as his father's room, and because she had never once found a way to say the true thing, which is that she wants the room and a chair in it, and nobody else in there ever. She has a house. She has a son. She said both of those things to me that morning, and I heard neither of them, because when a woman like that tells you about a door she is standing outside of, you are not listening for the floor plan. I said she should take the coats out. She said it was not about coats. I said that in my experience it always is, in the end, and she laughed with her mouth shut, which is the only way she does it. Then she said, without any change in her voice at all, that she had been down a shaft on Sunday with a thing on her back that had taken her arm as far as the elbow, and that the trick with those is to let it have the arm until it stops pulling. I said, that sounded like a bad Sunday. She said it was a very ordinary Sunday and that the bad one was the week before, when a man had made her wait 40 minutes in a car park for a set of keys, and she talked about the 40 minutes for longer than she had talked about the arm. That is the shape of every conversation I have ever had with her. She has no scale. A thing that would empty a room is an item, and being kept waiting is an outrage, and she says both of them in exactly the same voice, and I have still not got used to it. Then she put me down at the shop and said my name the way she says it, and pulled out before I had the door closed. 460 on the board, 27th on a list that had not been read yet, and a boy who had gone 2 rounds without opening his mouth, which should have told me exactly how much worse the second week was going to be. The North Hall is the good one. Sprung floor, high windows, heated, and a door that only opens for final years, and I had been in that building 14 months without ever seeing the inside of it. Sela walked me in at 7 on Thursday evening with her towel round her neck and her hand flat between my shoulder blades, steering, the way you bring in a horse you have bought and want people to look at. There were 9 of them on the floor and a woman on the bench at the side with a paper bag on her knees, eating. She was eating when we came in and she was eating when we left, and in the months that followed I never once saw that bag empty and I was never once offered anything out of it. That is not rudeness. It has simply never crossed her mind that food is a thing that gets shared. Everybody there called her the hall. She owns the big one across the river, the one with the 2,000 seats, and she has owned it for 11 years, and in this country that makes her more important than most people with a number on their chest. She said, without looking up, that Sela had brought a yard hand into a final year session, and she would like to know why before she stopped chewing. He sat on a juvenile in the West Hall on Monday, while 30 ranked students held the shape, Sela said, and this morning he took first fall off my brother in the dark without touching him. The hall stopped chewing. Then she looked at me for about 6 seconds, which is a long time to be looked at by a stranger with a bag on her knees, and she said the thing she says instead of hello. Could 2,000 people watch that? She said. I do not know, I said. That is the wrong answer, she said, and at least a true one, and she went back into the bag. A final year called Vesson decided to find out what I was. He is 14th, and he has a way of asking a question so that the question is the insult, and the words are all polite. So, he said, how would our guest close a gate? And he made a little space in the middle of the floor for me to come and stand in while I answered it. I would not, I said. I have never closed a gate, and I have never seen one closed from the front, and everything I know begins about 6 hours after somebody like him has gone home to bed. That is honest, he said. And then, in that case, I am not entirely sure what the 9 of us came in here to look at. So I asked him what he does with the ones that come out afterwards. There are none, he said. There are always some, I said. The site is swept, he said. And I said, by whom? He did not have it. 9 final years standing on a sprung floor, and not one of them knew who goes into a closed gate site after them, or when, or with what, or how many things are still alive down there when they do. I told them, 4 to 11 a site, mostly young, mostly hiding, and the sweep is 3 men with hooks and buckets on a night rate, and one of the 3 is 19 and has been doing it for 2 years, and none of them have ever seen a badge. Vesson said, 4 to 11. He said it the way you say a number back when you are checking whether you heard it. Sela put the towel back on her neck and ended the conversation there, having got exactly what she came for, which was 9 final years watching her stand next to something new. Paul said, from the bench, through a mouthful, that she wanted him on her floor. She said it to Sela and not to me, because in her world, the person is not part of the negotiation. She said there is a demonstration evening in 3 weeks. She has a hall that holds 2,000, and she has never in 11 years had a thing in it that people talked about on the way out. Then she said the other thing, and she said it lightly, and I did not understand until much later that it was the most naked sentence anybody said to me that month. She said that when it is full, she is going to speak first. 11 years, she said, and I have never opened my own room. Somebody with a number always does it. Then she looked into the bag. I would like to be the one who says the first thing in it, she said. Once. I said yes, I would like to tell you I weighed it. What I actually did was say yes to the first adult who asked me to be somewhere, because that is what a person does when he has been the last name on a list for 18 months. I learned the next thing later from Sela, who told me because information is the only currency she carries and she spends it to buy things she wants more. Friday morning, Dael went to Hesta before the corridor filled up. He did not complain about the dark and he did not mention Thursday. He said the class had twice watched a boy with no badge be called capable and that if she believed it, she should put him on the block and let the yard hear the weight. That is the cleverest thing he did all year, and he was 18 when he did it. He did not attack me. He went and found the one person in that building who cannot walk away from a chance to be proved right, and he handed it to her. Hesta moved 2 lessons to get the yard at 10, and she told the class it was because the light is better in the morning. The light in that yard is the same all day. What is different at 10 is that the final years cross it on their way to the North Hall. The block sits in the yard behind the West Hall. It is a slab of packed gray the height of a man, and it gets recast every term, and you strike it once, and somebody carries the piece that comes off to the scale and says the weight out loud. Somebody has to carry the piece, and it is always the youngest person standing there, and in 2 years I have not once seen that job have to be given out. There is a queue for it. That is the only measurement in this academy that nobody argues with. There is no board and there is no paper. Somebody picks up what you broke off, puts it on a scale, and says a number, and the whole yard hears it. Hesta had the class out there at 10. She was pleased. She had her sleeve pushed up over the brace, and she was walking about like a woman who has waited 11 years for a morning, which she had, and she went round the class in order. Tara went with 1 arm and still took off 2.5. A girl called Senet took off 4. Dael took off 6.25, which is a genuinely good number for 18, and nobody in that yard was surprised. Then Hesta said my name, and the class went quiet as a room does when it already knows the ending and wants to watch anyway. I hit the block. I have hit things for 2 years, and I know how to put my weight through my hand. A piece came off the size of a thumbnail, and it went into the grass, and a boy had to look for it. He found it. He carried it to the scale. He put it on and he read it out, and he read it out loudly, because he was 15 and it was the funniest morning of his life. The scale could not find it. It sat there on the pan and the needle did not move off its rest, and the boy read out the number that is not a number twice, because the first time nobody believed him. She wiped the pan afterwards. She had brought a cloth for it and she had been wiping it between strikes all morning, which nobody had asked her to do and nobody else in that academy has ever done, and she wiped it after mine as well, with nothing on it. I stood in front of 30 people in a pair of coveralls with my hand still wringing, and there was nothing whatever to be done about it. No trick, no dark room, no cornered animal, a slab of gray and a boy laughing at a scale. I'm not going to make that into anything. It happened, it was measured, and the measurement was correct. In this country, the block does not lie, and everybody there had watched the same thing. Esther had gone very still. She had brought them out to be right, and she had been wrong in public, in her own yard, with her sleeve pushed up. She said the next thing straight at the class and not at me, and it was true, and it cost me the following month. The block measures output, she said, and output has never once been the same as use, and if you cannot hold both of those at once, you are going to be a very ordinary hunter. Nobody heard the sentence. What 30 people heard was a teacher explaining why the weight did not count, which is the sound of an excuse, and an excuse made for you in public is worse than the failure it covers. Then Dael did the only unnecessary thing he did that day. He said, loudly enough for the yard, that they should put the scale on the boy instead and see whether it could find him either. The class laughed, and he had earned that one, and I will not pretend otherwise. He had stood in a yard and watched a scale fail to find me, and he had made the joke that everybody there was already halfway to making, and he made it first. Vesson was watching from the far side of the yard because final years come out to see the first block of term. He said, across the whole yard, that he had asked the netmaker a question on Thursday night that 9 final years could not answer, and that he had not laughed at anybody since. I killed it faster than anything I could have said, and I said nothing, because I was still doing the translation, and by the time I had it, the yard had moved on. Sella was in the doorway of the West Hall with her towel, and she did not come out. She said one sentence to her brother as he went past her, and I only got the end of it, which was, and that is why they will never put you at the table. He stopped walking for about half a step. It is the only time I saw somebody hit him with something he could not hand to his mother. Hesta found me in the equipment store an hour later with the brace off and her hand flat on the bench, which I had never seen and never saw again. I had gone in there for buckets. I want that on the record because fetching buckets is the reason I was ever anywhere in that building, and it is how I met most of the people in this account. I was wrong to bring them out, she said. But you were right about what you said to them, I said. Being right afterwards is a hobby, she said, not a defense, and I have been doing it for 11 years and I have got very good at it. Then she told me the truth, which nobody else in that building ever bothered to. You understand that nothing here keeps you, she said. There is no rule that keeps a boy with no badge in this academy. What keeps him is that somebody with a room wants him in it. I asked how many people had ever wanted me in a room. She counted on the bench with her good hand and got to 4. And every one of us wants you for a different reason, she said, and not one of those reasons is you. She put the brace back on. It clicked. Go and do your shift, Halv, she said, and it was the first time that word came out of her sounding like a thing she had thought about. By 4 o'clock, somebody in the canteen said 31st out loud, and by the end of the afternoon, 3 people had said it, and it went round that building without anybody checking it. By the end of the afternoon, somebody had worked out that a scale cannot report nothing at all, and that the boy must therefore have read it wrong, and that theory had 4 supporters by the evening, and not one of them had been standing in the yard. Pim was 2 tables away and heard all 3 of them. She did not turn round, and she did not write anything down, and she went on eating, and I understood by then that this was Pim holding a thing back rather than Pim missing it. On the way out, she said one sentence to me at the bin without looking up. A number said in a canteen on a Friday is a rumor, she said, and a number said in the hall on a Monday is a fact, and you have until Monday. Then she took her own tray back to the rack, because she always does, and I stood by a bin at 4 o'clock on a Friday, having just been given a deadline by a girl of 15. Pim did not amend anything. She waited. She always waits for Monday, and Monday was 3 days away, and 3 days is a long time to spend as a number that has already been said aloud in a canteen. What I could not tell anybody that afternoon is why it mattered, and it is not pride. My place here is not a place at a school. Nia and I are in this country on it, and it is our entire standing, and a student with no badge who produces nothing has no claim on it that anybody must honor. Nobody had said that to me yet. Nobody needed to. You do not have to be told a thing like that in a country where everything is a number and yours has just been read out as none. Went to the yard on Saturday and the ridge lot was still coming in wet. Booth had 480 chalked and the second bunker was open and he had 2 men off. You are on the long hook again, he said, and then he said the thing that is the closest Booth has ever come to a compliment. The second bunker took 11 tons on Thursday, he said, and on Thursday you were on it. I asked him whether he had ever been up to the academy. No, he said. I asked whether he wanted to see the block. The scale in the weighhouse goes to 600 kilos, he said, and the one in the office goes to 4, and if you need something weighed, you bring it to me. That is Booth. 2 years, and he has never once asked me a question about myself, and there were about 4 weeks that year when he was the easiest man in the country to be near. Mia came at midnight with a letter she had already written and wanted me to sign the bottom of because she had got tired of waiting for me to write one. I read it. It was 4 pages, and it was all true, and none of it was about me. She had written about the shop and the woman who runs it and the price of coal here and the fact that in this country nobody asks what you are because they read it off your chest. At the bottom of the 4th page she had left 3 lines empty, and she had ruled them so that there would be no argument about how much I was expected to put on them. "We'll do it in the morning," I said. "You said that in the spring," she said. "The spring was different," I said. "Tell me how," she said, and I stood in a yard at midnight with a hook in my hand and could not do it. She did not push. She is 14 and she has better manners than I do. She put the letter back in the dictionary between the pages where the corner is folded and said she would carry it about until I was ready, which she then did for 22 days. Before she went, she asked me what a person has to do to get a badge. "They measure what you break," I said. She thought about that for a while, standing under the yard lamp with the dictionary against her chest. "And what do they do about the ones you do not have to break?" she said. And I did not have an answer for her, and no question anybody put to me that month has stayed with me longer. Maureen came at 6 as usual. She had the engine going and the door open, and she asked me, straight out, what had happened on Friday because she had rung twice on Friday night and I had not picked up. That was the moment. I have been over it more times than is good for a person. She was sitting there asking an open question with nothing underneath it, and all I had to do was say 4 things. That I am 19, that I am a student at the academy she had walked into once, that I am the last name on a list of 31, and that on Friday a scale could not find what I broke off a block in front of the whole class. I said a shift had run over and she took it because she has never in her life asked a person to prove a small thing. She said all right, and she pulled out, and she did not ask again because she never asks anything twice. Nothing at all on the scale. 480 on Booth's board, 3 days until Pim read a list that everybody in that building had already read out for her, and my net's still up over those doors. Pim reads the list standing on the 3rd step in the entrance hall because the 3rd step puts her head level with everybody else, and she worked that out when she was 16. She went down through it on Monday without any weight on any of the names, as always, and she got to the bottom, and she said the half of my name, and she said 31st, and she did not look at me when she said it. That is what a fact sounds like here, and it is not shouting. A girl on a step, saying a number in the same voice she used for the 30 above it. 4 days earlier, I had been 27th in that same hall. It is a strange thing to be handed back your own worst number by somebody who has been careful with you, and I did not blame her, because she was reading a room and the room was correct. Dael did not enjoy it out loud. That is the thing I noticed and did not understand. He stood at the side with his hand in his pocket and he let it happen, and he did not say one word about it, and by then he had gone 4 days without a speech. He had stopped talking on the Monday she walked in, and he never really started again. I thought the class had bored him. What had happened was that every sentence he had was built to end with his mother in it, and he had lost the ending, and he had not yet found out what else a threat can be made of. So he stopped using words and started using people, and it took him until Wednesday to work out how, and I have to give him this much. Nobody taught him that. He was 18, and he had lost his only sentence, and he went and found a new method inside 3 days. Wednesday morning, the corridor outside the West Hall, 2 boys from our year, Resum and a big quiet one called Ferret, said in front of about 18 people that they had watched me come out of the equipment store on Tuesday night with something in my bag. I had been in the equipment store on Tuesday night. That is where the buckets are, and the buckets are mine to fetch, and about a dozen people had seen me go in, which is exactly why that night was chosen. Hesta came down the corridor with the brace already clicking. She did not ask me anything. She said, "Bag," and she put her hand out, and the corridor stopped moving. I gave her the bag. She opened it on the floor with everybody watching, and she took out a long hook with a green band on the handle, and the green band means it belongs to the academy and not to the yard, and I had never carried one of those in my life. I would like to tell you that I stayed calm. What actually happened is that my hearing went strange and the corridor got very bright, because a boy with no badge caught taking academy property does not get a punishment. He gets sent home, and home is a place my sister and I are not allowed to go back to with nothing. Hesta asked me whether I had taken it. I said no, she said, then explain the hook. I said I could not. That is the true answer, and it is a terrible one. There is no good version of not being able to explain a thing that is lying on the floor in front of 18 people with your bag around it. Resum said he had seen me put it in. Ferret said the same. They said it in that order, and they said it quickly, and Ferret said it slightly too soon, and I have spent 2 years standing very still near frightened things, and I know what too soon sounds like. I did not accuse them. I want that clear, because it would have been the natural thing, and it is also the thing that would have finished me. 2 boys with badges against 1 boy without one is not an argument that gets weighed, it gets counted. What I did was ask Hesta for 2 minutes and the door. She asked what I wanted with the door. I said the door was all of it, and that if she gave me the 2 minutes, she would not have to give me anything else. She looked at me for a long time with her hand on the brace. Then she said, 2 minutes, and stepped back off the middle of the corridor, and that is the largest thing anybody in that building ever did for me, and she has never once mentioned it since. I went and opened the corridor door, the one to the yard, and I pushed it right back until it stayed on the catch, and the cold came in, and everybody there felt it come in. Then I said, to the corridor, and not to either of them, that I was not going to ask anybody a question. I said nobody has to say anything to me. I said the door is open, and anybody who does not want to be standing here can go, and nothing happens to them, and I will not look at who it is. And then I turned around and faced the wall, which is the only difficult section of it, because a man facing a wall in a corridor of 18 people looks like a man who has given up, and everybody there is entitled to think so until it is over. I heard the corridor stop breathing. I heard somebody laugh once, hi, the way you do when you cannot work out what you are watching. I counted to about 9. Then I heard boots on the tiles behind me. Ferret went out through that door and he went fast, and the sound of him going down the yard steps was the loudest thing in that building all week. Nobody said a word. Resum stayed where he was for another 4 or 5 seconds with his mouth slightly open, and then he sat down on the floor. That is not a confession. There is not much else you can call it either. Hester picked the hook up off the floor and put it under her arm and said nothing for a moment, and nobody in that corridor moved while she decided. It is one move and it takes one sentence to explain. A cornered thing takes the first exit it is offered, and the trick is that you have to actually mean it because they can tell. Second sentence is the one that costs. Everybody watching gets to see who ran, which means I did not clear my name that morning. I broke a boy in a corridor in front of his year, and he was 17, and I have never been able to make that sit flat. Resum got up eventually and said to Hesta that Dael had given them each 2 months of canteen credit. He did not say it to be brave. He said it because he had been sitting on a floor for a minute and a half working out which of 2 people he was more frightened of, and I had been standing in front of him the whole time with my back turned, which is the only reason he chose as he did. Dael was at the far end of that corridor. He had been there the whole time. He had come to watch it, and he had stayed to watch all of it. And when Resum said the words about the credit, he did the thing he always does and handed the finish to her. He said that all of this was going to be extremely interesting when his mother heard about it, and he put a little space before the last 3 words, as he always does, so the room can get there before he arrives. The corridor did not react. That is all. 18 people who had been reacting to that sentence twice a week for 7 months just stood there and looked at him and let it lie on the floor with the bag. He said it again, slightly louder, with her in it again. Somebody near the stairs said, "All right," in the tone you use to a man who has already been asked to leave a shop. I did not enjoy that. I have gone over it, and I am fairly sure I did not. And then I remember that I stood there and did nothing while it happened to him, and that is a form of enjoying it. So let us call it what it is. Senate said 22nd in the canteen at lunch, out of nowhere, with her mouth full, to a table that had not asked her anything. She has done this every single time, and I have never caught her deciding it. The number simply arrives in her, unannounced. 4 people argued with her. They did not argue about the direction. They argued about the size. A girl said 25th and a boy said 19th, and there was an actual argument in a canteen about where to put a person who does not have a number at all, and it went on for most of the hour. Pim let it run and did not touch it. By Thursday, the canteen had settled on 22nd the way a room settles on a price, and 4 different people said it out loud in front of me that day, and none of them said it to me. She would not confirm it. The list is read on Mondays, she said, and she was not going to be pushed into a number by a canteen. Then she said, and it is 22nd, and went off to her lesson, having refused to say a thing, and said it. That is the trick with Pim, and it took me too long to see it. She does not decide what the room believes. She waits until she can hear what it believes, and then she says it first, and saying it first is what makes it true. On Wednesday evening, the hall came to the academy in a car the size of a bunker and had me brought out to the visitor row. She did not get out. She had the window down and the bag on her lap, and she talked to me through the window for 9 minutes while eating something with a bone in it. 2 weeks on Thursday, she said, my floor. 2,000 seats, and I am going to fill every one of them, and I have never done that either. I want the thing you did with the coveralls, and I want it bigger, and I want people standing up. I said the thing with the coveralls only works on something already frightened, and that you cannot arrange for that, and that on a good night you wait 2 hours for it and go home. She said through the bone, then frighten it. I said no. I said that in my country you never make one afraid on purpose, not for a crowd, and not for anything, because a frightened thing does the one move you cannot predict, and somewhere in a room of 2,000 there is a child in the front row. She stopped eating for the 2nd time in our acquaintance. She said in the front row, and I said in the front row, and neither of us said anything for a while. Then she said, all right, bring me something else, and put the window up. The car took her away, and I stood in the visitor row and worked out that I had just refused the only person in this country who had offered me a room. I have thought since about what a woman like that hears when somebody says no to her. She sells rooms. Everybody who comes near her wants the room and takes the terms, and I had turned down 2,000 seats in front of her driver over a child I invented who might be sitting in the front. Is the only reason she came back. If I had said yes, she would have had her evening and forgotten my name by the spring. Sela caught me on the same stairs on Thursday, out of breath, towel, in a hurry, the whole performance. She said her brother had bought 2 boys with canteen credit and that everybody in the final year now knew it, and that she had personally made sure of the second half of that sentence. I asked her why she keeps doing this. She said, because when he goes down I go up, and there is only one table in this country I want to sit at, and there has never been a Stroud at it who was second. Then she said the useful thing, which she always saves for the end because she wants you to stay standing there for the length of the whole conversation. She said, Marlo comes through in 11 days. Your sister is in the first group. I said, what is she like? Sela said, she does not talk. Then she said, and she has taken more badges off in this country than she has put on, and people find that out too late because she never says which one she has come to do. Nia was waiting outside the shop when I got in on Thursday, and she had the dictionary open on her knees on the step in the cold because she had heard about the hook by then. The gate girls talk, and the gate girls talk loudly. She asked whether they had found it in my bag. I said yes. She asked whether I had put it there. I said no. She said she knew that and that she had asked so that I would have said it out loud once that day to somebody who believed it, and then she went in to make tea. 14. She has been 14 for 4 months, and she manages me the way you manage an animal that will not eat in company. I told her about Sunday. I said I had been asked to eat at somebody's house. She asked whose, and I said a friend, and she looked at me over the top of the dictionary for a while and then said, congratulations, in a voice I have not been able to describe since. Booth had the norm on the board that night, dead on it for the first time in 9 days, and he said the number out loud twice, once when I came in and once when I went out, and he was as close to happy as he gets. He said the ridge lot was finished and the second bunker was clear, and there was a new site opening on the North Road in 13 days, and he had put my name down for it. I asked him whether he wanted to know what had happened to me at the academy that week. He said the new site would want 3 men on it and the pay was a night rate and a half. Then he said, you are on 3, and went to check a weighbridge, and that was the entire conversation, and I would not have swapped it for any other one I had that month. Rain picked me up at 6 and did not drive off. She sat with both hands on the wheel and the engine going and looked through the windscreen at a wall, which she has never done. She said she had gone into the room on Tuesday, the office, the one with the coats behind the door, the one she had been walking round for 6 years the way you walk round a hole in a floor. I asked what was in it. She said a chair, a desk, 4 coats, and 11 years of somebody else deciding what a door in her house was for. She said she took 2 of the coats out and put them in the hall and then stopped because her son came down the stairs, and she said the next thing in a completely level voice, which is how she says the things that cost her. She said, he asked me what I was doing, and I said nothing. And I picked the coats back up and put them where they had been, and I am 41 years old, and I stood in my own house and lied to a boy about a coat. I said she should go back in and finish it. She said it is not that simple. I said it never is, and she said, no. It is worse than that. It is that I have never once brought anybody into that house, and until I do, that room belongs to a man who left it. Then she said she was going to. She said it as she says everything, without any build, and it took me a second to understand that I had just been invited somewhere. Sunday, she said, come and eat with us. And then, because she cannot leave a thing without a shape on it, she said 7 o'clock, and that she would be outside the shop at 22. 22nd on a list I would not hear read until the following Monday, 420 on the board, 11 days until the examiner came for my sister, and a Sunday coming that I spent the whole week looking forward to. On Friday, Dael stopped coming at me altogether and started asking people about my sister, and he did it politely, which was much worse. He asked Senate when the entrance groups go through. He asked a second year what happens to a family when the one with the place loses it. He asked the girl who runs the gate book what time my sister had been waiting outside on Monday and how often. None of that is a threat. Every one of those is a question a helpful person might ask. He asked a dozen of them in 2 days, and by Saturday I could feel the shape of it in the building the way you feel a draft and cannot find the window. I did not go to him about it. In my country, you do not warn a man you have seen him, because a man who knows you have seen him simply moves, and then you have lost the only thing you had, which is knowing where he is. Friday morning, Vessin crossed the entrance hall in front of about 60 people and said good morning to me by name and used all of it, and then went up the stairs without stopping. A final year does not know the name of a second year. There is no reason for it to happen, and it does not happen. And the 60 people in that hall understood exactly what they had just been shown, which is that somebody with a 14 on his chest had decided in public that I was a person he greets. Senate said 14th before I had got to the second step, to a girl who had not spoken to her, and the girl said it straight back before either of them had looked at me. Pim was on the third step with her arms folded. She had watched Vessin do it, and she had watched me answer him, and she had watched me walk up past her without saying anything at all because I was still doing the translation on Vessin. She said, morning, at the back of my head, in a completely flat voice. I said morning without turning round. That is one of about 4 things I did that year that I would go back and do again differently. Sela worked it out on Friday afternoon in a car park, and I know that because she told me 11 days later, and she told it the way you tell a thing you are proud of. She came out of the North Hall at 6 and saw a car in the visitor row and knew the car. She has been getting into the back of that car since she was 9. Then she stood by the wall in the cold for 4 minutes and watched a boy from the second year come out of her mother's building and get into the front of it. She did not go over. she went home and ate dinner in the same room as her mother and her brother and said nothing at all to either of them, and she has told me since that it was the best evening she has had in this country. She did not tell me she knew. That is the thing about Sela, and it took me a long time to stop being angry about it. She spent the next 9 days helping me, generously and visibly, in front of people, and she never once said why, and I walked around inside her plan thinking I had found a friend. Saturday, the hall sent the car for me again, and this time the window came down before it stopped. She said, well, I said I had something. She said everybody has something, and most of it is standing up and hitting a block. So I told her what happens after a gate closes. I said that the country sees the front of it, the ranked ones going in, and the doors coming down, and then everybody goes home, and there is a hole in the ground with 4 to 11 living things in it that nobody has ever put in a room. I said that 3 men go down there on a night rate with hooks and buckets and a lamp that fails on the hour, and that this happens about 9 times a month, and that in 2 years I have never once met a person in this country who knew we existed. She asked what the country thinks happens to them. I said the country does not think anything happens to them because the country has never been given the chance to wonder, and that this is the only advantage the 3 of us have ever had. Paul stopped eating for the 3rd time in our acquaintance, and this time she put the bag down on the seat beside her, which I had not seen her do at all. She said, how many of them are afraid? I said all of them, she said, and how many do you bring up alive? I said as many as we can, and it is never all of them, and nobody has ever asked us that question in 2 years. Then she said the thing that made it real, which was, and none of them would be a child in my front row, because none of them would be in my hall at all, they would be in a hole, and I would put the hole on my floor. I said she could not put a hole on a floor. She said, watch me, and told her driver to go, and left me standing in a visitor row for the 2nd time in 3 days. Booth would not talk about it. I went in on Saturday night and said that a woman wanted to put the sweep in front of 2,000 of them, and Booth said the North Road is 4 to 11 and the rate is a night and a half, and I was on 3. I said, Booth, 2,000 people, sitting down, watching you and me and Averin do a sweep. The second bunker takes 11 tons, he said, and the North Road site opens in 11 days. Then, about an hour later, out on the weighbridge with nobody near us, he said, they would have to see the lamp go. Otherwise, it is a man with a bucket. That is the entire contribution Booth made to the largest thing that happened in that hall all year, and it turned out to be the whole design, and he has never mentioned it again, and he would not know what I meant if I brought it up. She was outside the shop at 20 to 7 on Sunday, which is 20 minutes early for a 7 o'clock, and by then I could have set a watch by it. I had one clean shirt. Nia ironed it on the shop counter with the woman who runs the shop supervising, and the 2 of them made me stand there while they decided about the collar. And Nia said I looked like a man going to ask for a job. I said it was dinner. She said at a house, and went back to the dictionary and did not look up when I left, which I only understood later. The house is on the hill on the north side, and it is not enormous, and that surprised me. 2 floors and a gravel front and a hall light on and a set of steps up to a door with nothing on it at all. There was no name on it and nothing else either. The hall inside had a coat rack with 2 coats on it that did not belong to anybody living there. I knew what they were the second I saw them, and I did not say a word about it. And that was the last easy decision I made that evening. There was a door on the left with the light off behind it. She looked at it as she went past. It was not much of a look. She has one length of step and she did not change it, and she looked at that door the way you check a bruise. She said, that is the office, and kept walking. And I understood that I had been brought here as the second half of a decision she had made about a room. She said her daughter was in, and that her son was upstairs, and that she was not going to make anything of any of it because she had not made anything of it to them either. Then she said, Sela, and a woman came out of the kitchen at a fast walk with a towel over her shoulder and her face already arranged. I have thought about that face many times. It was the face of a person who has been waiting since Friday. She said, and this is, and left a space. And her mother filled it with my name, all of it. And Sela looked at me over her mother's shoulder for about a second and a half with an expression of pure and undisguised joy. She said she was pleased to meet me. She shook my hand. She said, and what is it you do? And her mother said, he works nights on the yards. And Sela said, does he? And something happened at the corner of her mouth that I will remember when I have forgotten most of that year. I did not run. I want that on the record because there was a moment in that hall with the coats and the office door and a 4th rank shaking my hand and calling me sir, where running was very available. Then a door opened upstairs, and I heard it, and I did not think anything about it at all, because a house has doors in it, and this one had a son in it, and I had been told so in the hall 4 minutes earlier by a woman hanging up a coat. I know the sound of him on stairs. Every person in our year knows the sound of him on stairs, because he comes down the west stairs at 8:10 every morning and the corridor moves for it. Came down 4 steps and stopped, and put his hand on the rail, and looked at me standing in his hall in a shirt his sister had just been introduced to. And nobody said anything at all, and neither of us said one word. His mother was 2 meters away hanging up a coat and had her back to both of us, and the 2 of us stood there in complete silence for what I have never been able to make less than 5 seconds. I did the arithmetic while he was standing on the stairs. I have always done arithmetic at the wrong moments. His mother. The class calls him one's boy. His mother is one woman who has picked me up outside a yard gate at 6 in the morning since the spring, who eats bad coffee out of a holder and complains about car parks, whose whole name I am the only person in this country who says is the first rank of it. There is a photograph of her in the entrance hall of that academy, high up and small, and it is her at about 22 in gear with the word underneath it and no name. I have walked past it perhaps 1,100 times without once looking up because it is a picture of a hunter and I clean up after hunters. She has been threatened with, twice a week, for 7 months under my own net in a room she has never walked into except once. Marine turned round with the coat on the hook and said, "Dael, come down, this is Halvir," and said it again, entire, for the second time in 4 minutes. He came down the last 4 steps and shook my hand. He said it was nice to meet me. He said it clearly and he did not falter on it, and he looked me in the face while he did it, and I have never in my life respected anybody more for anything, because he had the same 5 seconds I had and he used them better. He worked out that he could not say it, and he worked out why, and he did all of that on a staircase in front of his mother, at 18. If he had said one word, the sentence would not have been that his mother was seeing a boy from his class. The sentence would have been that the first rank of this country in a year and a half had picked out the last name on his list and never once come to see him. He would have had to stand in a corridor on Monday and say that out loud himself, so he did not, and I did not, and we sat down and ate. I have been asked since why I did not say it. People assume it was kindness, and it was not. If I had opened my mouth in that hall, I would have been a 19-year-old student at her academy who had let her drive him about for a year without mentioning it, and she would have found that out in front of her children. That is what I was protecting, and it was not him, and it was not her. Every single thing I did for the next 4 days I did because I could not stand for her to find out in a room with other people in it, and when it happened in front of 31. 4 places. She put me opposite him. She did not think about it for a second. There was no reason in the world for her to think about it. She asked me whether the shift had been heavy. I said it had been all right. Sela asked whether the yards used the green banded hooks or the plain ones, and looked at me while I answered, and I said the plain ones, and Dael put his fork down and picked it up again. Marine said her son had had a difficult month, and that a boy in his year had been very stupid about something and it had been dealt with. Sela asked what the boy had done. Marine said she had not asked, because she does not, and that whatever it was he had presumably learned from it. Dael said, "He did. He said it into his plate. It is the only sentence he said at that table that was not about food." Then Sela, who had been waiting the whole evening for one clean shot, asked her brother whether they had done the block yet this term. He said they had. She asked what he took off. He said 6 1/4. She said 6 1/4, in exactly the voice a person uses when they have already worked out what they are going to say next. And then she said, "I was at 7 1/2 at your age," and put a piece of bread in her mouth. Their mother did not look up from the dish. She said, out of nowhere, and to neither of them, that she had come off the roll of that academy at 19 with a mark on the block that she had never once repeated and had never once needed. Nobody at that table asked her what it was. I have thought since that this is the most frightening thing about that family. 3 people sat there and let it go by, because in that house, a number is a rude question, and I was the only one at the table who had spent the week being one. She talked about the office. She has one subject when she is happy, and that was it that week. She said the desk was going out on Saturday, and the chair was going out with it, and she was going to have a wall painted. And she said, and Halvir is going to help me carry it out on Saturday, and she put a potato on my plate while she said it, without stopping, the way you hand somebody a thing that has already been agreed. Dael did not look up. His sister did. Sela looked at her brother for a long, unhurried moment across a dinner table, with a towel still over her shoulder, having said nothing all evening and won everything in the room. The rest of that meal took 50 minutes and I could give you every one of them. Dael ate. He answered his mother in short sentences. He passed me the water once, across the table, because she asked him to, and he did it without any particular expression at all. Twice he looked at the door on the left with the light off behind it. I did not understand that until much later either. At the door his mother told him to say goodbye properly. He said goodbye properly. He said goodbye and my whole name, and it was the first time in 14 months that anybody in that class had used all of it to my face. In the car she said that had gone well, and that she was glad she had done it, and that she felt better about the room than she had all week. She said she would ring me on Tuesday. She said my name entire at the shop steps and pulled out before the door was shut, and I stood in the street in an ironed shirt at 10:30 at night. Nia was awake, sitting up in the cold room over the shop with a blanket round her and the dictionary shut, which is the only time I have ever seen it shut. She asked how it was. I said fine. She said, "Whose house?" And I said a friend's, and my sister looked at me across a room where she had been sitting up for 3 hours waiting to hear about it, and said all right, and went to bed. I lay on my back for a while and put it in order. 22nd on a list, 4 to 11 a site. 10 days until the North Road opened and 8 until Marlowe came for my sister. And my net still hanging over those doors, and a boy eating his breakfast every morning in the same house as the only person in the country who says my name entire, and neither of us able to open our mouths about any of it for as long as we could both keep it up. I got to the entrance hall at 7:20 on Monday, an hour before anybody, and I stood underneath the photograph and looked up at it properly for the first time in 14 months. It is her. Once you know, there is nothing else it could be. The set of the shoulders and the way she has her weight, and the fact that whoever took it caught her mid-step, and every one of her steps is the same length. I stood there long enough that the woman who opens the doors asked me whether I was all right. I said I had never looked at that picture before. She said, "No, nobody does. It is too high," and went off with her keys. Then I went upstairs and sat through an entire day in a room with him, and I have no idea what was taught in any of those lessons, and I could not name you one of them. That is the section nobody would believe if I invented it. Two people who between them knew the single largest thing in that building, sitting 4 meters apart for 6 hours, neither of them able to open his mouth. He could not say it because it would have made him the boy whose mother goes elsewhere. I could not say it because I was 19 years old and I had let a woman drive me about for a year without ever once telling her what I was. So we did lessons. We did a hand drill in the West Hall and Hesta paired us because Hesta pairs by list position and the list had us 4 apart. And we did 40 minutes of it and neither of us said one word beyond what the drill needs. At one point he had my wrist and I had his elbow and we were both breathing hard and about 8 inches apart and he said, quietly, so that only I could hear it, 60 seconds. I said, "What?" He said, 60 seconds of you talking and you are on a train, and I have thought about that a great deal since, because it was true and he never used it. Pim read the list at 8:30 and put me 14th. She read it from the 3rd step in her ordinary voice with no weight anywhere in it, and she got a boy called Alam wrong on purpose in the middle, and 9 people corrected her, which is the most she has ever had. 14th, 7 days after she had read me last out of 31 from that same step in that same voice to that same hall with the same 9 or 10 of them not listening at the back. Somebody at the back said it was a joke and somebody else said he took first fall off Dael in the dark and cleared a hook out of his own bag with the door open, and what did you do this term, and there was no answer to that. So the number stood. Dael did the speech at 11:30, first time in 2 weeks. He got up under the net with one hand raised at it and did the whole opening, and he did it well, and I will not pretend he did not. The class did not laugh in any of the 3 places, and they were not being cold about it. They simply did not. The way you do not laugh at a joke you have heard somebody make about a person you have since met. That is the thing about a room. It does not vote and it does not announce anything. It simply stops doing the thing it used to do, all at once, without any of them agreeing to it beforehand. Got to the end and reached for the finish because it is the only finish he owns, and he said, "And if he forgets what he is, my mother will." And then he stopped. Right there. He stopped in the middle of his own sentence in front of 30 people because for the first time in 7 months he could hear it and he could hear what it now meant, and so could I. Senate said, "Will what?" from the 3rd row, and she said it kindly, and kindly was worse than anything anybody had ever said to him in that room. He stood there for a moment with his hand still up at the net, and then he sat down. Sella found me at lunch and did not bother with the stairs this time. She came into the 2nd-year canteen, which final years do not do, and sat down opposite me with her towel and her tray and about 40 seconds of heart in her. She put her tray down and did not sit for a second, and then she sat, and she said, "You were at my house on Sunday," in the voice of a person laying a card face up because there is no longer anything to be gained by holding it. I said yes. She said she had known since Friday. I asked why she had not said anything, and she said because I was enjoying it. And she said that without any shame at all and went on eating. Then she made the offer. She said she would keep it off the final year floor, which she could do because a thing does not exist in this academy until either she or Pim has picked it up. I asked what she wanted. She said she wanted me at the demonstration evening standing where the final years could see me, and she wanted her name said out loud in that hall by whoever opens it. I said the hall opens her own room. She said, "Then it will be a very short sentence and I want my name in it." And I said no, and I did not take the second to think about it. She put the towel around her neck, which ends a conversation, and then she did not get up, which was new. She sat there for a moment and said, "You understand that I'm the only person in this building who is on your side." I said she was on her own side and had simply parked it next to mine for a fortnight. She said yes and laughed, and I liked her more in that second than I ever did before or afterwards. And she said the useful thing, because she always does, and this time she gave it away free. She said, "My brother has 1 card left and it is your sister, and he will play it this week, because after this week he will not have anybody left to play it in front of." He came and found me at 4 in the equipment store where I was fetching buckets, which is the same room where Hesta had told me nothing here keeps you. He did not have anybody with him. That was the first thing I noticed. In 7 months I had never once seen him within 10 feet of me without at least 4 people arranged behind him. He said my sister sits her entrance in 7 days. He said the examiner is Marlowe. He said Marlowe takes more off than she puts on, and that all it takes is one person telling her something about the family of a candidate before she goes in the room. I said, "What would you tell her?" He said that her brother is in this academy on a place that was bought for him by a village and has never once produced a measurable result. Which is true. That is what makes it a good card. It is not a lie, and it does not need one. And if he had gone and said it to a woman with a case, my sister would have been on a boat. I said the only thing I had, which was nothing at all. I said, "She is 14 years old and she has never done anything to you, and she has been in this country for 5 weeks, and she carries a dictionary about because she is frightened of getting a word wrong in front of somebody like you." He said no, and stood there in a store cupboard looking at a shelf, and then he said, "And nor have I to any of you that you would recognize as anything." I have gone over that sentence for a long time. He was 18 and he was wrong about it. And he was not entirely wrong about it. And both of those can be true in a cupboard at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. He went out. He got as far as the door and said the last thing over his shoulder, and it was the worst of the two. He said, "And she is going to find out what you are, and I would rather it came from me." He meant every word of it as a threat, and he walked out of that cupboard with no idea whatever that he had just described, out loud and in advance, the exact thing he was going to do to himself before 6 o'clock. I did not tell anybody. I went to the training hall at 5 because our year has the floor at 5 and everybody in this account was in that room by 10 past, and I stood at the back under my net and worked out that I had 4 days to stop a boy from ending my sister. I did not have 4 days. I had about a quarter of an hour, and I spent 9 of them standing at the back of my own class making a plan about a boat timetable, which is the sort of thing you do when the actual answer is walking towards you across a floor. He came in at 20 past with 6 people and put himself in the middle of that floor and said, before anybody had settled, that he had something and that everybody was going to want it. Sella was standing in the doorway. She had come down from the North Hall to watch because her brother had told her nothing, and she had worked out from his face at lunch that he was going to do something and she wanted to be in the room for it. He said, "Our netmaker did not come to this country on his own." He said he brought a sister. He said her name and he got it right, and that is how I knew he had been preparing. Nobody laughed. Not one person in that room laughed, and I do not think a single one of them decided not to. He heard it. You could see him hear it. And a person who has been standing on a floor being agreed with twice a week since the winter does not know what to do in a silence because he has never once had to hold one. So he went for the finish. That is all he did. He reached for the only finish he has ever owned, and he said, "And if any of you think I am the one being unfair here, ask my mother." And Senet, from the third row, in the same kind voice she had used at 11:30, said, "We have never met your mother." The next 4 seconds decided, so I am going to be accurate about them, and I have had a long time and a great many quiet shifts in which to get them straight. He looked at Senet, then he looked at me. Then he understood that the only thing standing between him and the entire class believing he had invented her for 7 months was the one fact he had promised himself on a staircase on Sunday night that he would never say. He said, "She eats dinner with him." Nobody moved. He said it again, louder, because nothing had happened and he needed something to happen. He said, "My mother. She eats dinner with him. He was at my house on Sunday. She picks him up outside a shop at 6 in the morning. Then he stopped and turned on the spot and looked round at 31 faces to collect what he had earned, which is a thing he had done at the end of every speech he had given in that room for 7 months. I have never seen a room do what that room did. It went completely silent, and it stayed silent, and it was not the silence of people who do not believe a thing. It was the silence of people doing arithmetic, because what they had heard was not that his mother was seeing somebody. What they had heard was that the first rank of this country had spent a year picking up the last name on that list outside a shop at 6 in the morning and had never once come to see her own son do anything. Wesen was on the stairs behind the doors, and he said it quietly, and it went across that floor like a dropped tray. He said, "So she has never been here for you." Dael did not answer. There was no answer. He had brought the sentence into that room himself and carried it into the middle of the floor and put it down, and it had turned round and taken his legs. He looked at me, and I understood something I would rather not have. He had not done it to hurt me. He had done it because a room had gone quiet on him and he had nothing else in his hands. And it is the exact thing I would have done at 18 with a mother like that. The doors opened at the far end because it was 20 to 6 and she is always 20 minutes early. She got 4 steps into the room and stopped, which is the distance she always stops at, and she had the keys in her hand. 31 people turned round. Nobody said one word to her and nobody said one word to me, and the whole room simply stood there and watched a woman walk in. She said sorry, and then she said my name, every syllable of it, and asked whether I was ready, in the voice you use in a doorway. I could have gone. That is the honest shape of it. She was in a doorway holding a set of keys, and she had understood nothing at all, and I could have walked the length of that floor and got in a car and had my 4 days. So I said it. I said it to her from the middle of the floor with 31 people listening, and it took about 10 seconds, and it is the only genuinely brave thing in this whole account. I said, "I am 19. I said, "I am in this class." I said, "I was 31st out of 31 on the week you met me, and today I am 14th, and I have never told you any of it, and I was not going to let you find it out from somebody in this room." She did not move. She did not change her face, and she did not change her voice, and the keys did not move in her hand. She said, "All right," and she said it in the voice you use to a man who has told you the shop was shut. 2 words, in a room of 31 people who had just been given the largest thing that had ever happened to any of them, and she put it down and did not pick it up again, and that is when I understood what she actually is. Then she looked past me, at her son, standing on the floor where he had put his own sentence down, and she looked at him for a while, and then she looked up. For the first time in her life, she looked up at the doors of that training hall, at a net that has been hanging over them since the 2nd week of winter, and she said one thing to him. She said, "Dael, is that your net?" He said no, and it came out of him too fast, and every single person in that room heard it come out too fast, and a boy near the doors made a small noise that he then had to turn into a cough. She waited. She has one length of step, and she has one length of silence, and she used the second one on her own son in front of his entire year, and it went on for a very long time. He said, "No, it is his." Then, because she was still waiting, he said the rest of it, and he said it to the floor. He said, I took it off him in the winter and I put it up there. Nobody in that room breathed, and she nodded once and said nothing else about it at all and turned round and walked out to the visitor row to wait because she had said she would be outside at 6 and it was not 6. Pim was standing on the bench with her arms folded, having watched all of it and said nothing, which is what Pim does. She waited until the doors had shut. Then she looked round the room and counted it, as she does, and she gave the number out loud in her ordinary voice on a Monday evening that was not a Monday morning. 9th, she said, and then she stepped down off the bench and went to her lesson because as far as Pim was concerned, she had just done the only piece of work in the room that mattered. And I went out through those doors underneath my own net, past 31 people who now knew everything there was to know, and got into a car with the first rank of it, and neither of us said a word until the second junction. At the second junction, she asked how long I had been at the bottom of that list, and she asked it as she asks everything, with no lead in and nothing underneath it, and both hands on the wheel. I said, 18 months. She said nothing for about half a mile. Then she asked whether anybody at home knew, and I said no. She asked who had paid for the place, and I told her about the 61 households and the 2 collections. She drove for a while. Then she said, without any weight on it, that she has been closing gates for 19 years and has never in that time watched anybody do what I did with a pair of coveralls on a Monday morning, and that she had assumed I knew that, and that she could see now that I had not. Said she could have mentioned it at some point in the year. She said she had mentioned it. I asked when, and she said, on the night I met you, and then she said, I said your name, and she said nothing else about it for the rest of the drive. That is all she gave me, and it is more than anybody else in that country gave me in 2 years. She did not go back into that building. She did not ring anybody. She did not fix one single thing, and by the following week I understood that she was never going to, and that this was not a failure of hers. She asked whether I had eaten. I said no. She drove past the yard and past the turning for the shop and bought me a bad dinner at a place by the river that stays open for the night cruise and made me eat all of it while telling me about a desk. Then she said, Saturday, the office, 10 o'clock, and bring somebody who can carry the other end, and she said it as though the largest evening of my life had been an interruption in the middle of a plan about furniture. I said I would bring my sister. She said, does your sister lift? I said my sister carries a dictionary about all day. She said that was not the same thing, and then said fine, and put me down at the shop and pulled out before the door was shut. 9th out of 31. 7 days until a woman with a flat case came for Nia, a net still hanging over those doors with the class now knowing whose it was and who had put it there. And a boy going home that night to a house on the hill, to a mother who had asked him one question in front of his entire year and had not asked him a second one, which I would not have wished on anybody, and which he had built himself out of 7 months of speeches. She came in on Tuesday at 11 and nobody had said she was coming, and I have since found out that nobody is ever told, and that this is not an oversight. A woman of about 50 in a gray coat with a flat case under her left arm, walking down the main corridor at the speed of somebody who has been in this building before and does not need to look at anything. The corridor was full because it was between lessons. She did not ask anybody to move, and people moved. She stopped in front of Vesson. He was standing outside the North Hall with 2 other final years, and he had his bag on one shoulder and he was laughing at something. She put the case flat against the wall, opened it about 4 inches, and took the badge off his chest with 2 fingers. She did it the way you take a burr off a sleeve. Then she put it inside the case and shut the case and walked on down the corridor and out of the far doors. She did not say one word. Not to him, not to anybody. She was in that building for about 90 seconds. Vesson stood there with his bag on his shoulder and his hand on the front of his coat where a thing had been that morning. His 2 friends had stepped back about a meter without meaning to, and one of them never spoke to him again. He was 14th in this country on Monday. On Tuesday at 4 minutes past 11, he was a 19-year-old man in a corridor with a mark on his coat where the pin had been. I have thought a great deal about that mark. It is the only proof anybody gets. Nothing is written down and nobody signs anything, and there is no room you can go to. There is a slightly cleaner patch on the front of a coat and a woman getting into a car outside. I want to be exact about the rule, and I only have to say it once, because it was only ever shown to me once. Everything in this country hangs off a piece of metal that a person pins on your chest by hand. And what is put on by hand can be taken off by hand, and the hand belongs to somebody who does not explain. By 11:30, the whole academy knew. By lunch, the second years had worked out a reason for it, and the reason they had worked out was me. Nobody said that to my face. What happened was quieter and much more effective. 2 people who had said good morning to me on Monday did not on Tuesday. A boy moved his bag off the bench so I could sit down and then remembered he had somewhere to be. Senate did not say a number. That is how I knew it had gone bad. For 3 weeks, that girl had been announcing my position to rooms that had not asked, and on Tuesday, she looked at the table when I came past it. Pim did. She was on the 3rd step at 4:30 with the hall emptying round her, and she was not reading because it was a Tuesday, and she said 9th out loud to a corridor of about 40 people who had not requested it. A boy said, after today. She said, 9th, he said, but after today. She said, I read a list, and I do not read the weather, and she said it in a voice I had not heard out of her before. I did not go over. I should have. I went past the bottom of the steps on my way to the buckets with my head down like everybody else in that building, and she watched me do it, and she never mentioned it that day or ever. It cost her more than anything anybody did for me that month, and it took me a fortnight to find out what. And she has never once mentioned that either. I went and found Vesson at 4 in the North Hall, which was empty, because a final year with a mark on his coat is not somebody the other 8 want to be doing a drill next to. He was sitting on the bench with his coat across his knees. He said, before I had got to him, that it was not my fault and that everybody in that building was going to spend the rest of the term telling him it was. I asked him what he was going to do. He said he did not know. He said that when you have had a number since you were 15, there is no thought in your head about what a person without one does all day, and that he had been sitting there for 4 hours trying to have that thought for the first time. Then he said, and you would know, would you not? And he laughed, and it was a bad laugh, and I sat down on the bench and told him what the night rate is and what the hours are and how you get taken on. It is the only useful thing I have ever said to a ranked person in that country. He did not come and work the yards. I want to be accurate. He went home to his family in the north in the spring, and I have not seen him since, and Booth would have taken him, and that is where it went. Hesta was in the equipment store that evening with the door shut and the light off, and I found her because I went in for buckets and nearly walked into her. She was standing in the dark with her back against the shelves and her right hand round the brace on her left, holding it, the way you hold a wrist that has been hurt. Do not put the light on, she said, without turning her head. I stood in the doorway. That is the same case, she said after a while. It is the same woman and she has not changed the coat either. 11 years, I said. In June, she said, in the corridor outside the room I teach in now, and she took it off me in front of a class I was halfway through. What did you do? I asked. Nothing, she said. And then, that is the answer. I had done nothing. She said it without any heat at all, which is not how Hesta says anything. Then she said the thing that has stayed with me longer than most of what happened that month. They do not tell you why, she said, and so you spend years building a reason, and after a while the reason is your whole personality and you cannot put it down. I said I was sorry. She did not want that, she said, and never had, and I was to take the buckets and go. Go on, Halv, she said, and the brace clicked, and that was the end of the only conversation the two of us ever had in the dark. Sela came down to the second-year floor for the 3rd time in a fortnight, and she was not out of breath, which frightened me more than anything else that week. I'm not going to be at the demonstration evening, she said. I asked why. Because being visible is a thing you do when the case is not in the country, she said. You have been visible with me for a fortnight in front of the entire final year, I said. Yes, she said. And I have spent since 11 o'clock working out how to be less so, and I am telling you to your face because you would notice anyway. That is the most honest thing anybody has said to me since I got here, I said. Do not enjoy it, she said. I am still going to use you. Then the towel went round her neck and she went back up. And she stopped on the 4th step and said one more thing without turning round, which is the only time I ever saw her give something away for nothing. She took my father in 6 years ago, she said. Same corridor. My brother was 12 and he was in the building. I found Marlowe on Wednesday. It took me a day and a half, and the only reason I managed it is that Booth knows where every vehicle in that district parks overnight, and Booth answered the question because I phrased it as a question about a vehicle. She was in a car outside a hotel by the bridge, eating a sandwich out of paper on her knees, with the case on the passenger seat beside her. I knocked on the glass. She put the window down about 4 inches and looked at me without any expression whatever and did not stop eating. My name is Halvir, I said. My sister sits her entrance on Monday and she is 14 and she has been in this country 5 weeks. Whatever anybody has told you about me, I said, she has never done anything and she does not know any of it. Ella looked at me while I said all of that. She finished it. She let me get all the way to the end and she did not once look away and she did not once move her face. Then she folded the paper up along a crease that was already in it and put it in the door pocket and put the window up and did all 3 of those things without hurrying and without once looking at me while she did them. She did not say a word, not one. She drove out of that car park with me standing in it, and I have never in my life felt so completely spoken to by somebody who had not opened her mouth. That is when I understood what had actually changed. For 7 months I had been fighting a boy. A boy can be beaten in front of people, and he can be made to eat it, and he stays in the room and you can see him. This was not that. This was a woman with a sandwich who does not argue, does not threaten, does not explain, and cannot be humiliated, because you cannot humiliate a person in front of witnesses if she does not care what the witnesses think. Every method I have works on something frightened. She was not frightened. She has never been frightened in a corridor in her life, and I stood in a car park by a bridge and had no method at all. Dael was at the shop when I got back, which is a sentence I could not have said out loud a fortnight before without somebody asking me what was in the bucket. He was on the step in the rain with his hands in his pockets, and he had been there long enough to be wet through, and the woman behind the counter had already asked him twice whether he wanted anything and he had said no both times. I asked what he wanted. Is it because of you? He said. He said it straight, without any of the arrangement he usually puts round a sentence, and he had clearly been standing in the rain building it. I do not know, I said. Vesson said good morning to you in front of 60 people on Friday, he said, and he had a badge on Monday and he did not have one on Tuesday, and that is either all of it or none of it, and nobody will ever be able to tell which. That is the first accurate thing you have said about any of this, I said. I am not doing it to be accurate, he said. My mother is in it, and my sister is in it, and I am in a class where nobody will stand next to me either. And I did that, he said plainly, standing in the rain, and I did not say anything back, because there was nothing to say that would not have been a kindness, and he had not come for one. I did not tell her anything about Nia, he said. Is that true? I asked. You have no way of knowing, he said, and turned round and walked off up the hill in the rain, and that is the exact moment he stopped being the enemy here and started being a witness to something larger. Paul sent for me on Thursday, and this time the car did not come to the academy. It came to the yard, at 2 in the morning, which is the only occasion in 11 years that vehicle has been on that road. She had the window down and the bag on her knees, and she looked at the bunkers behind me for a long time before she said anything at all. I have been advised to move the evening, she said. I asked who by. Nobody at all, she said, which is how it is done, and I have had 4 telephone calls in 2 days from people who wanted to talk about anything except the thing they rang about. Move it, I said, and I meant it. A woman with a case took a final year apart in a corridor on Tuesday for standing next to me, I said, and I am not worth a haul. Do not do that, she said. I have sold seats to 2,000 people on a thing that has never been in a room before, and if I move it, I am a woman who was told to, and everybody in this town will know which of those 2 I am for the rest of my life. Then she ate for a while. And I am going to speak first, she said, in the way you say a thing you have decided not to be talked out of, and put the window up. Booth had the North Road on the board that night with a start date on it. He said the site opens in 6 days and there are 4 to 11 on it, and he had put me down for the first sweep. I said there was a chance I would not be in this country in 6 days. Booth looked at the board and then at me. The night rate is a night and a half on a new site, he said. If you are not here, I put Ivrin on 3, and it takes him a fortnight to learn the hook. That is the closest anybody came to telling me they wanted me to stay, and it came out of a man who was doing sums about a hook, and it has stayed with me longer than most of the kind things that were said to me that month. I got a message from Maureen at 9 on Friday night, and it was the first one she had ever sent me that was not about a car park. It said, Saturday still stands, 10 o'clock, bring the sister. 3 sentences, no greeting, nothing about the corridor, nothing about the woman in the gray coat, and no question anywhere in it. I stood in a cold room over a shop and read 6 words about furniture from the first rank of the country on the day a woman with a case took a 19-year-old apart in a corridor, and I understood exactly what she was telling me, and she would deny to this day that she was telling me anything. She was not going to change one thing about her Saturday, not the time, and not the plan, and not the desk. If they are watching her house, they can watch her carry a chair out of it with a boy from the 2nd year and his 14-year-old sister. She never once said that out loud. She has never in the whole time I have known her explained anything she did. Nia was reading in the corner with the blanket. There was a man outside the shop at 4 o'clock, she said, without looking up. Dael was outside the shop at 4 o'clock, I said. No, she said, a man, and old. And he stood across the road under the awning by the ironmonger for about an hour, and he did not buy anything, and he did not come in. What did he look like? I asked. A good coat, she said, a long dark one, and there is a patch on the front where something has been taken off, and you can see the mark from across the road. 9 out of 31, and a coat with a mark on it standing outside my sister's shop, and a woman with a flat case somewhere in that town eating a sandwich in a car, and 3 days until my sister walked into a room with her. We were on the gravel at 10 o'clock on Saturday because Nia had made us leave the shop at 20 past 9 for a walk that takes 15 minutes. She had the dictionary under her arm. I said she was not going to need it. She said she would not be the person in the room who did not know a word, and she had been reading the section on furniture on the way up the hill. Maureen opened the door with her sleeves already pushed up and looked at my sister for about 2 seconds and said all of her name correctly first time, and my sister went the color of a brick and did not speak again for 10 minutes. The office had one window and it faced the wrong way, and it smelled of a coat cupboard. There was a desk against the far wall the size of a small boat, and a chair behind it, and a shelf with nothing on it at all. She had cleared everything else herself during the week. That is the thing I did not know until I saw the room. She had taken out the papers and the pictures and the 2 lamps on her own at night over 4 evenings, and she had left the 2 objects that needed a second person. Why does the room have a chair in it if nobody sits in it? Nia asked, and the first thing she said in that house. That is a very good question, Marina said. It was not one, Nia said, and Marina laughed with her mouth shut, and my sister looked extremely pleased with herself for about 4 seconds. Can I open the window? Nia asked. It does not open, Marina said. Nia went over and opened it, and it opened, and the 2 of them stood there looking at an open window in a room that everybody in that house had believed for 6 years had a window that did not open. Would like to record that this took 10 minutes of the morning, and that at the end of it, Marine said the sash had been painted in when the room was done, and that she had been told it was broken, and did not say by whom, and did not have to. Sella came down at 10:30 in her training kit and stood in the doorway drinking something and offering nothing, and said the desk had been in that room since she was 6. Yes, Marine said. Are you throwing it out? Sella said. I am putting it on the gravel, Marine said, and after that it can be somebody else's problem. Then she picked up her end and said, Halvir, the other one, and I took it. Dael came down at 11:15, and I heard him on the stairs and put my end of the desk back down on the boards, because I had no idea at all what was about to happen, and neither did anybody else in that house. He said nothing. He came into the room and looked at the desk and looked at me holding one end of it, and then he took the corner nearest the door and lifted, and the three of us carried it out through a hall we had all stood in a week earlier for entirely different reasons. It took us 4 goes to get it round the turn at the bottom of the stairs. Left, he said. Your left? I said. Yes, he said. My left, in exactly the voice he used to use in the corridor, and none of us laughed and all 3 of us heard it. We got it onto the gravel at 11. Nia held the door. Sela supervised from the step with a drink in her hand and made 2 suggestions, both of which were wrong. And then a man came up the drive, walking slowly, on gravel, in a coat, and every one of the 5 of us saw him at a different moment, and not one of us said anything until he was halfway. He was about 55, and the mark on the front of that coat was exactly where my sister had said it would be, and you could see it from the gate. Somebody had unpicked a patch off it carefully, and it had made no difference because the cloth underneath had not faded with the rest. He looked at the desk on the gravel first. He looked at it for a long time before he looked at any of the people, and I have thought since that this is the only completely honest moment he had all day. Then he said, "Hello, Marine," and he put a little warmth on the front of it, and she straightened up off the chair she was carrying and said, "Corvin." That is all she said. She said his name once, and then she went back into the house for the chair, and she did not so much as glance at him again for 10 minutes, and I want you to hold on to how long 10 minutes is when somebody is doing that to you on gravel in front of his own children. He tried Sela first. He said her name and said she had got tall, which is a thing you say to a person you have not seen since they were 9, and she is 22, and she is the 4th rank of this country. She said, "Hello," and drank the rest of her drink and went inside and did not come out again for half an hour. He tried Dael. He said, "And what are you carrying furniture for?" in the voice men use when they think they are being warm. And Dael said, "Because she asked me to," and picked up the other end of the chair. Then he tried me, which is what he had come up that drive for, and he did it after the other 2 had gone, and he did it standing between me and the door, which I did not think about at the time and have thought about since. "You must be the one," he said pleasantly. He had heard about the business in the training hall, he said, and everybody had heard about it, and it was about time somebody in that building had shaken the tree. "I put an animal in a crate," I said. "No, no," he said, and then he said the sentence that told me all of him. "You have got her attention," he said, "and there are perhaps 4 people alive who have ever had that, and you want to be careful what you spend it on." "I am not spending anything," I said. "Everybody spends it," he said, "and if you ever want a word with somebody who understands how this actually works, I am about." And he gave me a look that he probably thought was conspiratorial. Then he said he would have a word with Odile about the demonstration evening, because he had known her for years, and she was a difficult woman, and I would need somebody in the room who could handle her. "Paul has already given me the evening," I said. "Yes," he said, "but the terms, there are no terms," I said. "There always are," he said. "She opens it and I do the sweep," I said. "And that is the terms," he said, and looked delighted, having just described the thing I had told him twice. That is the entire trick of him, and it took me most of that morning to see it. He does not know anything. He agrees with what he has just been told about half a second after being told it and puts his own hand on it, and if you are not paying attention, it sounds like a man with information. Marine came out of the house with the chair on her own and put it down on the gravel next to the desk. "Corvin," she said, "take the other end of this and get it round to the road." He did it. He was there to be useful, and she had given him something to be useful with, and he could not have got out of it without saying out loud that he had come for something else. So the 2 of them carried a chair down a drive, and he tried to talk to her the whole way, and I could hear about 1 word in 4 from the step. I heard him say he had been thinking about the boy. I heard him say the word arrangement. I heard him say that if there was ever a question about the examiner, then he still knew people, and that a word from the right quarter, and I did not hear the end because they went behind the hedge. They came back up the drive without the chair, and without whatever it was he had been saying. He was not talking anymore. He was walking beside her at her pace, which nobody can do for long, and looking at the gravel. She said, "Nia, come and hold the door." And my sister, who had said nothing to anybody for an hour and a half, went past that man in a doorway and held a door for a woman carrying an empty shelf, and did it as though she had been asked to do something important. Then Corvin said the thing that finished him, and he said it to be kind, which is the part of him I have never managed to file properly. "And there is your entrance on Monday," he said, to my sister on gravel, in front of 4 people, and I would not lose sleep about it, because these things get taken up again all the time, and a year makes no difference at all at your age. Nobody moved. Nobody said anything for about 3 seconds, and it was the loudest 3 seconds of that morning. "What things?" my sister said, in a perfectly level voice, still holding the door. He looked round at the 4 of us and understood that he had walked into it. He had assumed we knew. That is his entire method, and it is why nothing he touches survives contact with him. He had come up that drive carrying a piece of news he believed was already in the room, intending to be gentle about it, and he had put all of it on a 14-year-old standing in a doorway holding a door for somebody else. I asked him what he had heard and where. I had it on Thursday, he said, from a man I play cards with whose daughter does the arranging of the entrance groups, and she has been taken out of the first group and out of the second and off the list for this year. Off it, Nia said. She did not say it as a question. She said it the way you repeat a weight back to a man on a weighbridge. For this year, he said, as though the two extra words made it into something else. When, she said. Wednesday, he said, he thought. And then, or possibly Tuesday, and that was the worst thing he said all day because a 14-year-old had just worked out that everybody in that town had known for 3 days except her. I want to tell you what I did. I did nothing. I stood on a gravel drive with a shelf in my hands and let a man who had lost his own badge 6 years ago tell my sister that she was not going to be allowed to sit down in a room on Monday. She did not cry. I would rather report that she did because what she did was worse. Thank you for telling me, she said, and she said it politely, and she meant it politely, and then she went and stood by the gate on her own with the dictionary against her chest. Marine put the shelf down and went and stood next to her at the gate. She did not touch her. She did not tell her it would be all right. She stood next to my sister at a gate for about 4 minutes without saying anything at all, and then she said one thing, and Nia has never told me what it was. Orvin said, into all of that, in the voice of a man who can feel a room going and thinks the answer is more of himself, that he could probably have a word with somebody about it if that would help. Marine came back up the drive at her one length of step and stopped in front of him. No, she said. And then she said the only sentence she said to him all day that had more than 3 words in it. You have been in this drive for 40 minutes, and you have made 2 people worse and nobody better, she said. And that is exactly what you did for 11 years, and I am not doing it again. He stood there. Marine, he said. The chair is at the road, she said. Then she went into the house and sat down in the empty office on the floor because there was nothing in it to sit on anymore, and she stayed there for about 10 minutes with the door open. Could all see her. She sat on the boards of a room with nothing in it, in the middle of the worst morning my sister has ever had, and she got what she had wanted for 6 years, and she did not look particularly happy about it, and she did not look sorry either. When she came out she said the room needed painting and asked whether I could get white in that shade from the yard. There is only one color of white, Nia said from the corner. That is not true, Marine said, and the two of them argued about it for 9 minutes. That argument is the only thing that helped anybody that day, and neither of them was doing it on purpose. My sister won it, incidentally, on a point about lead and chalk, and Marine made her say all of it twice. Dael was on the step. He had been there the whole time. He said, when his father had gone down the drive, that his father had done exactly the same thing to him about a school when he was 10. That's supposed to make me feel better? I said. No, he said. It is supposed to tell you he has not got a man he plays cards with. He has got a man he owes money to, and everything he told you this morning is true, and he heard it 4 days later than everybody else. And it was not me, he said. I know, I said. You do not know, he said. No, I said. I do not. And we sat on a step for a while, not saying anything, which is a thing we did about 4 times that month and never once mentioned afterwards. After a while, he asked what my sister was going to do on Monday. She is going to stand at that door at 9 o'clock, I said, because nobody has told her not to, and I will not be the one who does. That is stupid, he said. I know, I said. He looked down the drive for a while, at the place by the road where the desk and the chair were standing. She is going to walk up there in front of 100 people and be turned away in the doorway, he said. Yes, I said. Somebody has to be standing next to her, he said, in a flat, irritated voice, the way you point out that a job needs 2 men, and then he got up and went into the house, and that was the end of it. I did not know until Monday morning whether he had meant himself, and I still do not know what I would have preferred. Sunday was the worst day of that year, and there is nothing in it worth telling you. Nia read. I went to the yard on a day I was not down for, and Booth put me on the second bunker because he does not ask questions, and there was work there. At about 4 in the morning he said, 420. What? I said. That is the norm, he said, and you have put through 610 since 11 o'clock and you should go home. I would rather stay, I said. The bunker does not care, he said, and went to check the weighbridge, and I stayed until 7. 9 out of 31. A desk and a chair standing at the side of a road on the North Hill where anybody could take them. 610 put through a bunker between 11 and 4 by a man who did not want to go home. And a 14-year-old taken off a list on a Tuesday and told about it on a Saturday by a man in a coat with a mark on it, with 1 morning left before she walked up to that door anyway, because I had not been able to find her a single reason not to. There were 140 of them on the front steps at 9 o'clock on Monday with their families behind them, and my sister put herself in the queue at the back because she said the back was fairer. I said nothing about fairness. I stood next to her in yard coveralls at the end of a double shift and did not say 1 word for 10 minutes, which is the longest I have ever gone without ruining something. Dael came at 10 past. He came up the drive on his own, and he did not speak to me, and he did not speak to her. He stood on the other side of my sister with his hands behind his back, like a man on a platform, and he stayed there for all of it. Hesta came out of the building at 20 past and saw the three of us and did not go back in. She stood on the third step with her arms folded and her brace flat against her elbow, and she said nothing either, and about 40 people worked out from that alone that something was going to happen. Pim came at 1/2 with a dozen of our class behind her, which on a Monday morning in term means a dozen people who had all decided separately that whatever was going to happen on those steps was worth being late for. I have asked her since why she did it, and she has given me 4 different answers, and the only one I believe is the third one, which was that she keeps a list of 31 people and my sister was going to be on it, and she had already said the name out loud in a canteen. They did not stand with us. They stood off to the side in a line where they could see the door, which is the most Pim thing that has ever happened. Marlo was in the doorway. She had been there since before 8, which I know because the woman who opens the building told me later that she had found her already standing in it. She had the case flat under her left arm and her right hand on the edge of the door, and she let them through one at a time, and she looked at each of them for about a second, and she did not say one word to a single candidate in an hour and 10 minutes. That is how it is done. Nobody had told me, and nobody tells anybody. The entrance to the thing this country is built on is one woman standing in a doorway deciding with her hand. Mia got to the front at 20 past 10. She had been standing for an hour and 10 minutes, and she had not once looked round at me in all that time, and I understood afterwards that this had been on purpose. Marlo looked at her, then she put her weight against the door and held it, and did not move, and did not step aside, and did not look away either, and she gave my sister the full second she had given everybody else. Nobody behind us understood what was happening for about 4 seconds, and then all of them did at once, the way a queue does. Somebody near the back asked what the holdup was, and somebody nearer the front told him to be quiet. Mia said one thing. She said it clearly, in a language she has been speaking for 5 weeks, and she got all of it right, and she has never once got that sentence wrong since. She said, "Is it because of my brother?" Marlo did not answer. She did not shake her head, and she did not nod, and she did not blink, and she looked at a 14-year-old and she gave her nothing at all, and she looked past her at the next one. And then my sister did the thing that changed that morning, and I did not tell her to, and I could not have thought of it. She said, "Thank you." Then she stepped sideways out of the doorway and put her own hand flat on the door where Marlo had been holding it and held it open for the boy behind her. And she stayed there. She held that door open for the remaining 60 or 70 of them, one at a time, for the better part of an hour, in front of their families, with the dictionary under her arm. Marlo moved. That is the only thing that woman did in 5 hours that was not planned. She had to take a step and a half to the left, because a 14-year-old was holding the door she had been holding, and there was no longer any reason for her to be standing where she was. She stood in the second position for the rest of the morning, and I do not believe one person in that queue noticed except me and Pim noticed everything that morning, and Pim has never mentioned it either. Dael watched all of it from 3 feet away with his hands still behind his back. At about 11 he said to nobody that his mother had held a door once for 2 hours at a place on the coast and had never told anybody why. "Is that true?" I said. "I have no idea," he said. "It is the sort of thing people say about her, and I have been repeating it since I was 9, without ever once asking her. Not one person in that queue said anything to her. 2 of them said thank you. A woman at the back stopped and looked at her for a long moment and then went in without saying anything, and I have thought about that woman on and off ever since. You want to know what I did about it? I did nothing. I stood on a step and watched my sister hold a door, and I did not go and take it off her because she had not asked me to, and because at some point in the last month I had learned that much. It was Hesta who told me what was happening inside about 40 minutes in, when she came down the steps at speed with the brace already clicking. "The third room," she said. "They brought in a live one for the last group, and somebody opened the crate before the instructor was in there, and you have 19 14-year-olds in a room with a door that opens inwards." I went in past my own sister, who was still holding the door, and she stood back to let me through and did not ask me anything, and Marlo was standing 4 feet away and watched me go. Third room is not a hall. It is about the size of a canteen with benches down the sides, and it has one window and one door, and the door opens inwards, and there were 19 children standing on benches with their backs against the wall. It was a full-grown one, not a juvenile. Somebody in that building had put a grown one in a crate for an entrance because it looks better, and it had got out, and it was in the corner by the window with its head low, doing exactly what a full-grown one does in a room it cannot leave, which is not run. I will be exact about the difference. A juvenile is frightened, and a frightened thing wants an exit. A full-grown one in a corner is not frightened, it is waiting, and it has picked which of the 19 it is going to go through, and there is no bucket in the world that helps. So I did not use the coveralls. There was nothing in that room a pair of sleeves would have done anything about, and anybody who tells you otherwise has never been 8 feet from a full-grown one in a space with benches in it. I used the door. I got the door off the catch and pulled it back the whole way and stood behind it. And then I told the 19 of them to get down off the benches and come along the wall to me, slowly, without turning round, and I said it in a voice I did not know I had. They came. 14-year-olds do exactly what you tell them if you tell them one thing at a time and do not stop talking. I have since found out that I said the same 4 words about 15 times and that not one of them remembers what they were. It went for the last 2, which is what they do. They go for the back of a group that is moving away. I got in front of it with the door in my hand. Not a hook. A door. And I put the edge of it into the floor and turned it and let the whole weight of the thing go into 3 inches of oak, and it went into the door and not into a girl called Emmett, and it took me off my feet and up the wall. Door held. It is a good door. 3 inches of oak on 4 hinges, and it was hung about 90 years ago by a man who had no idea he was ever going to be the most useful person in that building. Then the instructor came in from the corridor with 2 second years, and it was over in about 9 seconds. And I sat on the floor of the 3rd room with my shoulder wrong and 19 children in the corridor and somebody shouting somewhere. Emmett is 14 and she is from a town on the North Road, and I have met her twice since. She got a badge in the spring. Outside, on the steps, in front of about 200 people, a man I have never identified said the thing that everybody says, which was, "Who is that?" And Pim answered him. She said my name, right through, from the side, without raising her voice at all, in the same tone she uses on the 3rd step on a Monday. And then she said, 6th, and went back to looking at the door. 200 people heard a girl put a boy with no badge at 6th out of 31 on the front steps of that academy, and about 9 of them said it back, and it went down that queue and out through the gate and into the town by lunchtime. And Marlo stood in the doorway through all of it, with the case flat under her arm, and she did not open it once. That is what I had not understood until that morning. Every single thing I know how to do works on a room. You do the thing with your hands and the room says a number, and the number is real because in this country, a room is where the truth lives. She is not a room. She does not have a currency, and she does not care what anybody in that queue thought of me. And I could have carried 19 children out of there on my back one at a time, and the case would have stayed shut, because the case has nothing to do with what a person can do. When she went to her car at 12:30, she walked past my sister, who was still standing by the door with her hand on it because nobody had told her she could stop. Hesta sat me down on the 3rd step afterwards and pushed my shoulder back into the place it lives, which hurt more than the wall had. "You understand that this changes nothing, Halv," she said. I said I did. "No. Listen to me," she said, in the voice she uses for the examination, which she had not used on me since the yard. "I have watched people spend 11 years trying to be so useful that somebody has to give it back," she said. "It does not come back for use. It never once came back for use." "What does it come back for?" I asked. "I do not know," she said. "And if I had known, I would not be teaching 2nd years." And she got up and went in, and that is the only time she ever admitted all of it to me. Nia was sitting on the low wall by the gate with the dictionary shut on her knees and both hands flat on top of it, which is what she does with her hands when she has decided not to do anything else with them. "I would like to go home now," she said. "To the shop," I said. "No," she said, and that was the only bad moment either of us had all day, and it lasted about 4 seconds. Then she said she had held that door for 63 people and that she had counted, and that 9 of them were going to fail anyway because they had gone in with their hands shaking, and that she would have gone in with her hands still. I said I knew. "Say it to somebody," she said. "I have got nobody to say it to," I said. "You have got about 200 people," my sister said. They were all standing there. I did not understand what she meant by that until the following evening, and when I did understand it, I had to sit down on a bunker step for a while, because my 14-year-old sister had worked out all of it on a wall by a gate and had said it to me in one sentence, and I had not heard it. Marine rang at 1 o'clock, and I told her all of it, in order, without leaving out the shoulder. She listened to all of it and did not interrupt once, which is not a thing most people can do. Then she said, "Halvir, is your sister sitting down or standing up?" "Sitting down," I said. "Good," she said, and then she asked whether either of us had eaten and said she would be outside the shop at 6 and rang off. That is what she does. She does not go to the building. She does not ring the woman with the case who she has known for 20 years and who took her husband apart in a corridor 6 years ago in front of a 12-year-old boy. She asks whether we have eaten. For about an hour that afternoon, I hated her for it, and that belongs on the record because it is the only hour in that entire year in which I did. Corvin went to see the hall that afternoon, and I know because she told me herself on the Tuesday, and she told it with her mouth full and enormous enjoyment. He got as far as her office above the foyer. He said he had come about the arrangement for the evening. "Which arrangement?" she asked. "The boy," he said, "and the terms, and I am speaking for the family." "Which family?" she said. "The Strouds," he said. "Are you a Stroud?" she said, and then she let it sit there in the room and went back into the bag, and by her own account she made him stand in it for a very long time. He said he wanted to make sure the evening was handled properly and that a hall of that size with a thing of that kind in it needed somebody who understood the risk, and then he made the mistake, which was that he told her he had spoken to people. "Which people?" she asked. He could not name one. He had said the sentence out of habit, as he says all of them, and this time he was in a room with a woman who sells 2,000 seats a night and has been lied to by professionals since she was 20. "The evening is on Thursday," she said. "I'm opening it myself and you are welcome to buy a ticket, and the ones at the back are 4. Then she asked him to move because a man was coming in with a floor plan, and he stood in a corridor above a foyer with his coat on and his badge 6 years gone, and she never thought about him again. 6th out of 31, a 14-year-old on no list at all. A full-grown one that should never have been in a crate, a door that held, a shoulder that clicked when I lifted anything for the next fortnight, and a woman with a case who had watched every second of it and had not opened it once. And 3 days until 2,000 people sat down in a room to look at something this country had never once been shown, and my sister was right about what I had, and it had been standing on those steps all morning, and I had been too busy being carried up a wall by a door to count it. They started building the hole on Tuesday morning, and Booth stood in the middle of a 2,000-seat theater in his yard coat and said the floor would not take it. Dael said the floor had taken an elephant. Booth said an elephant is one weight in one place and a bunker lot is 11 tons spread over 9 meters and moving, and then he said 420 out loud to a woman who had no idea what it referred to and went off to look underneath. Dael asked him whether he understood that there would be 2,000 people in the room. Booth said that 2,000 people is 140 tons and that it is spread out and sitting still and that it was not the people he was worried about. She looked at him for a while. Then, "Where have you been for 11 years?" she said, and Booth said, "The yard," and went and got a torch. He was under that stage for 2 hours. He came out and said they could have 6 meters by 4 and a depth of 2¼ and that the fourth beam from the riverside was to be left alone. And Dael had 9 men rebuild the whole design round the fourth beam from the riverside without one word of argument. That is the only time I have seen her take an instruction. She told me afterwards that she has spent 11 years listening to men explain her building to her and that he was the first one who had been underneath it. The site on the North Road opened on Wednesday, and it was a bad one. 4 to 11 is the usual, and we took 9 off it in a night, and 2 of them were nearly grown, and the whole lot went into crates on a lorry and across the river to a theater. Mia came to the yard both nights and would not go home. She had the dictionary and a pair of borrowed boots, and she stood on the weighbridge and wrote down what Booth called out, because Booth had said, without looking at her, that a man who is calling weights should not also be remembering them. She was on no list at all that week, and she was the only one in that town keeping a written record of anything, and if she noticed the shape of that, she has never said so. On Wednesday afternoon, Dael sent 4 men and a ladder to the academy and had my net taken down off the training hall doors. I did not ask for that. I want that clear, because for about a minute I thought somebody had done me a kindness, and then I saw her face when the lorry arrived and understood that a woman who sells rooms had simply seen a thing hanging over a door and known immediately what it was worth. The whole class came out to watch it come down. 7 months it had been up there. It took 2 men on a ladder about 90 seconds, and when it came off the bracket, the second man nearly dropped it, because it is heavier than it looks, and nobody in that building had ever handled one. Pim was on the steps. She said to about 40 people that the net had been up there since winter and that everybody standing there had walked under it twice a day for 7 months. Then she said, "6th," and went in. Dael was at the back of the crowd and he did not come forward and he said nothing, and when the lorry pulled out, he was still standing there looking at the empty bracket over the doors, which stayed up there for the rest of the year with nothing on it. The evening was on Thursday and she filled it. 2,011 seats sold with 60 standing at the back, which she told me at 4 o'clock in the afternoon in the voice of a woman who has been waiting 11 years to say a number. It was underneath the stage from 6 with Booth and a man called Ivran who has worked that yard for 9 years and had never in his life been inside a theater and kept asking who was going to clean up afterwards. She went out at 8, on her own, with no lamp on her and nothing in her hands, and she had told nobody what she was going to say, including the man who had spent 2 days lighting the front of that stage. I did not see it. I heard it from underneath, through 2,000 people going quiet all at once, which is a sound I would like to hear again before I am finished. She said, "My name is Dael, and this is my hall. I have owned it for 11 years, and this is the first time I have said anything in it, because there has always been somebody with a number on his chest to do it for me, and this evening, there is not." She said, "You are about to watch 3 men do a job that has been done in this country 9 nights a month for as long as any of you have been alive, and not one of you has ever been told about it, and when it is over, you may decide for yourselves whose fault that is." Then she said, "The lamp will go out at 9 o'clock. It is not part of the show. It goes out at the top of every hour in every hole in this country, and nobody has ever fixed it." And then she came off, and she stood in the wings with the paper bag in her hand and did not eat anything for the whole of the next hour, and that is the largest compliment that woman is capable of paying to anything. We went up at 8:10, the 3 of us, in the coats we work in, up a ladder that Booth had put in himself because he did not trust the one they had built. I will not make it more than it was. 3 men in a hole with hooks and buckets and 1 lamp working 9 live things out of a made pit in front of a full house in the dark as it is done, at the speed it is done. Called the weights. He did it as he does at the weighbridge, flat, into the room, because it is what he has done every night for 20 years and he was not going to start performing. 260, 310, 420. Nobody in that hall laughed at him. I had been afraid of that for 2 days and I had been wrong. 2,000 people sat and listened to a man in a yard coat say weights out loud, and by the 4th one, they had understood that it is a job with a number in it, and that is when the room turned. At 9 o'clock, On the hour, exactly as she had told them it would, the lamp went out, and it went out as it always goes out, which is all at once, and with no warning of any kind. 2,000 people sat in the dark for 11 seconds with 9 live things in a pit 6 meters from the front row and 3 men in it with them, and not one person in that building had known before that evening that this happens every hour of every night to somebody. When it came back up, Ivran had the last one bagged and was standing on the edge with the bucket, and the noise that came out of that room was not applause for a while. It was 2,000 people talking at once. Then the applause. It went on for a length of time I am not going to try to describe. And I stood in a hole in a stage holding a hook and my sister on the weighbridge steps at the side with a list of weights in her hand. And I have never had a better minute and I do not expect to. And then, while 2,000 people were still on their feet and the noise was still going, Dael came down into the pit. Nobody had asked him to. He had been in the 11th row with his sister and he had watched an hour of it, and at the end of the applause he got up and came down the aisle and over the front and into the hole, and he did it because there was one still moving in the far corner net and he thought it was loose. It was not loose. It was the second largest of the 9 and it was in a corner net, and it was doing exactly what a thing does in a corner net, which is wait. He got about 4 feet from it, in a good stance, with his hands right, doing everything he had been taught since he was 6, in front of 2,000 people who had just watched a man in a yard coat call waits. I said his name. Not stop, not down, not any of the words that would have been half a second faster and are the ones you are trained to use. I have thought about that a great deal since. In 14 months I had never once said his name out loud to him, not in a corridor and not in a store cupboard and not on a step in the rain, and there was no particular reason for that to be the moment except that it was. He stopped. That is all of it. He stopped where he was and he did not turn round and he did not do the thing he was about to do. He said, do not step. He did not step. I said, put your weight on the back foot and let it come forward and it will go left. And he did that, and it went left into the second bag, and Ivran closed it. It took about 9 seconds. 2,000 people saw all of it, and about half of them thought it was arranged. He climbed out. He said nothing to me, and I said nothing to him, and he went back up the aisle with his coat over his arm and sat down next to his sister, and I want to record that he did not leave the building, because a boy who leaves after that never comes back into a room again. And then, at the end of the best hour of my life, in a full hall, with the sound still going and my sister on the steps at the side holding a page of weights, the woman with the case came back into the room. She came in through the side door at 20 to 10 with the flat case under her left arm, and she walked down the side aisle at her usual speed and up onto the stage, and by the time she was halfway across it, that hall had gone completely quiet. She did not look at the pit. She did not look my way. She walked to the back of the stage where the net was hanging on the frame that Dael had built for it, and she put the case down on a box, and she opened it. There is nothing in that case except badges. I know because I saw into it that night from about 9 feet away, and there are 2 rows of them lying in gray cloth, and that is all. She took out a knife, and she took it out of the lid of a case that has nothing in it but badges, which means she had put it in there beforehand, at some point that day, on purpose. Then she cut my net off the frame in front of 2,000 people, and she did it properly, along the head rope first and then the belly, 4 cuts, and it came down onto the boards in 2 pieces, and she did not hurry over any of it. Nobody stopped her. 2,000 people and 9 men on the crew and the 4th rank of this country sitting in the 11th row, and not one person moved because there is nothing there to move against. Is one woman doing a thing with her hands, and there is no rule anywhere in this country that anybody has ever been able to point at. I did not move either. I stood in the pit and let her do it, and I would do the same again, and I still cannot think about it without my hands doing something. She put the knife away and closed the case and turned around and walked back across the stage towards the side aisle, at the same speed she had come in at. And then that hall did the thing that neither she, nor I, nor anybody else in the building had any way of expecting, and I have gone back over it more than any other minute in this whole account. It booed her. 2,000 people in a bot hall booed a rank examiner off a stage, and I was standing in a hole in the floor of it with a hook in my hand. 90 minutes earlier, not one of them had known the sweep existed. They did not shout and nobody threw anything. They booed steadily in a big room, which is a slow, ugly sound, and it followed her the whole length of that side aisle and out through the door and into the street. She did not go faster. That is the thing. She did not once change her pace because she does not care what a room thinks, and she never has. And the sound of 2,000 people meant precisely nothing to her, and she went out into the street with the case under her arm and got into a car. I stood in a hole with a piece of my own net in each hand and understood at last, completely, that everything I know how to do works on rooms, and that she is not a room, and that if I wanted anything back I was going to have to find something else entirely. Marine was in that hall. She had bought a seat like everybody else, in the 9th row, 4 along from her former husband, which I did not know until afterwards, and which she has never commented on. She did not come down. 2,000 people watched a woman cut a net up on a stage, and the first rank of it sat in the 9th row with her hands in her lap and did not move. And I could have told anybody in that building exactly what she was going to do, because it is what she always does. She came round to the door at the back afterwards, when there were about 6 people left in the building, and she said, "Halvir, I am parked," and asked whether Nia wanted feeding. That is all. She said nothing about the net, and she has never said anything about it from that day to this. And I have come to understand that this is because she thought I already knew what she thought about it, and she was right. and I did. Dael came out and picked the 2 pieces up off the boards herself in front of everybody and folded them over her arm like a coat. She said into the room that these were going up over the doors of her hall in the morning and that they would be there for as long as she owned the building. Then she said, and the ones at the back were 4, and got the biggest laugh of the evening out of a line that exactly one man in that hall understood, and he was sitting in the 9th row in a good coat with a mark on the front of it and had to sit all the way through it. He came round afterwards as well. He got as far as the pit steps and said to me that he had been saying for years that somebody should put the yards in front of an audience. I said, when? He said, for years. I said, to who? And he looked at me for a second and then said that it was a pleasure to see it done properly, and shook my hand and went. And that is the last time that man ever spoke to me. Sela came round afterwards. She did not say sorry for the fortnight of being invisible, and I did not ask her to. She said the evening had gone out of the town. There were people at the back from the coast and from the north and from 2 places she had never heard of, and by Saturday it would be in every hall in the country. It was not the pit, she said. It was that a woman with a case had been booed off a stage in front of 2,000 witnesses, and nobody in this country has ever seen that happen, and it is the only thing anybody is going to repeat. Then the towel went round her neck, which ends a conversation, and she said the thing I had not thought about for 1 second in 3 days, and said it on her way out of the door. She said, your village is going to hear this, not the hall, all of it, including where you have been on that list for the last 18 months. 6th out of 31, 2,011 seats and 60 standing, 9 off a site that should have had 420 called out flat into a theater by a man who has never seen a play, and 2 halves of my net folded over the arm of a woman who eats in the dark, and a boat coming in on Sunday with somebody on it who had put money in a collection 2 years ago and had come to see what it had bought. The academy was different on Friday morning in a way I could not read for about an hour, and then Senate worked it out for me by saying out loud in the entrance hall that 4 second years had gone home the night before and told their families about a hole. That is what had actually happened, and it was not the badges and not the booing. 2,000 people had gone out of that building at 10 o'clock on a Thursday, and by breakfast on Friday there were 4,000 of them, and every one of them was somebody who now knew a thing about their own country that they had not known on Wednesday. Esther had the class in the yard at 9 and did not do a lesson. She stood them in a line by the block and asked them, one at a time, what happens to a closed site. 29 of them answered. 23 of them were right because they had been in that hall or had been told by somebody who was, and 6 of them were wrong and had to say so out loud in front of the others. Then she said, 4 weeks ago, every one of you would have been in the second group, and she said it without any pleasure at all, and I understood that she was not saying it to them. I went and stood in front of Pim in the entrance hall at 12:10 with about 60 people in it, and I said her name first, before anything else, and I said it clearly. She had been on her way past. She stopped. She said, morning, and it came out slightly wrong, and then she stood there for a second and said, it is not morning, and I said no, and neither of us knew what to do next. Found out that afternoon what it had cost her. Nobody in our year had spoken to her properly for a fortnight. She had said 9th and a quarter on the Tuesday when the case was in the building, and 30 people had made a note of it, and Senate told me that 4 of them had stopped sitting at her table. I asked her about it later, and she told me the list is read on a Monday and read correctly. Then she said, and if I had waited a week, I would have been the sort of person who waits a week. I have known some hard people in this country. That girl is 15 and she is harder than any of them, and nobody will ever write it down anywhere, which is exactly how she wants it. Dael came to the shop on Saturday afternoon and did the stupidest thing anybody did to me in that entire year, and he did it on purpose, and it was also the first entirely decent act I ever saw out of him. He came in and he stood in the middle of the shop floor between the coal bags and the counter in more or less the exact place a woman with a case would be standing 48 hours later, and he took his badge off his coat and put it on the counter. I looked at it lying on a shop counter next to a jar of tacks for a while, and then I said, what exactly am I supposed to do with that? And I said it in the voice you keep for a man who has brought you a horse. He said, wear it. He said nobody looks at them properly, and that half the building could not tell you what their own one says, and that if I had one on my coat, nobody would ever ask, and he had clearly been building this for about 2 days. He said, Dael, it has your name in it. He said, it has a number in it. I said, and a name. And he did not answer that, because he had known perfectly well and had come anyway. Then I said the other thing, and it is the only sentence I have ever said to him that I would take back. I said, and if I put that on, then everything I have done in the last month was done by a boy with a badge on. He picked it up off the counter and put it back on his coat and got it crooked, and he did not straighten it, and he went out and the bell went. He was right about one thing though. He was the first person in that country to work out that a badge can simply be moved from one chest to another by 2 fingers, and that nothing would happen, and that nobody could ever prove anything. He had that 3 days before I did. The boat came in on Sunday at 6:10 in the morning in the rain with about 40 people on it and most of them asleep, and Soren was on it. He's about 70 and he runs the net house at home, and he taught me the hook when I was 11, and he has never in his life been outside our own country, and he came down the ramp in a coat he had borrowed off somebody and stood in the wet with a bag. I did not know he was coming. Sela had said a boat, and I had assumed it would be one of the men who organized the collections, and it was not, and I had to stand on a dock for about 4 seconds and put my face back together. He said my name. Halvir, all of it, and with the stress where it belongs because everybody at home says it that way and it costs them nothing. Then he put the bag down between his feet on the wet boards of that dock and looked at me for a while and said, "I have heard about the haul." "From who?" I said. "It came off a boat on Wednesday," he said, "and went round the North Shore by Thursday, and by Friday there were people in my net house who have never met you and have opinions about you." We walked up to the shop and I bought him a breakfast and he ate all of it, and then he said the other thing, and he said it in exactly the same voice, without any change of gear, which is how they do it at home. He put his knife and fork down in the middle of the plate, which at home means the conversation has changed, and he said, "And I have heard where you have been on that list. What I did next is not admirable, and I am putting it down as it happened." I started to explain. I got about 10 words into a sentence about how the block measures output and how output is not the same as use, and I heard my own instructor coming out of my mouth in a shop over a plate, and I stopped. He waited. Old men out of that net house are extremely good at waiting, and he had come across a sea to do it, and he was in no particular hurry about the rest of his morning. I said, 31st, and then I said, 18 months, and then I said, out of 31, and I had to say all three of those separately because they would not come out together. He said yes. Then he picked his fork back up and ate some more of his breakfast and said, "We knew about that in the spring." I said, "How?" He said, "The letters." He said, "A man who is doing well writes 4 pages, a man who is doing badly writes 2. A man who has stopped being able to say it at all writes half a page about the weather in a country where the weather is the same as ours." Then he said, "We did not need a boat to tell us. We needed a boat to find out whether you were still alive in there." And he tapped the table twice, and that is as close as anybody from home comes to saying a thing like that. I asked him what the village thought about the money, and I had been carrying that question about with me for so long that when it finally came out of my mouth, it did not sound like anything at all. He said, "The village put the money in." I said that was not an answer. He said it was the whole answer, and that 61 households had made a decision 2 years ago about a boy, and that not one of those households had ever once been asked to guarantee the outcome, and that a person who takes money and then owes a result has not been given money, he has been sold something. Then he wiped the plate with a piece of bread, because they do not leave anything at home, and said, "And now I want to see this yard." I took him. He was there for 4 hours. Booth called waits, and Sorn watched every single one, and at about 11 they got into an argument about hook lengths that lasted 40 minutes, and neither of them raised his voice, and neither of them gave anything away. At the end of it, Booth said the North Road was 4 to 11 and the rate was a night and a half. Sorn said, "At home it is 9 to 20 and there is no rate at all," and Booth said, "How do you get anybody to go?" And Sorn said, "They live there." Those two men understood each other completely inside 4 hours, and neither of them ever knew the other one's full name. Nia sat with him on the shop step in the afternoon and made him say all the words she had been unsure about, and he got 2 of them wrong himself, and she wrote both of those down as well. Wrote the letter that evening at the table in the room over the shop, with a man from home asleep in a chair 4 feet away and my sister pretending to read. She had been carrying it in the dictionary for 22 days, and the corner of the page had gone soft. She took it out and put it on the table in front of me and did not say one word about any of it, which is the greatest act of restraint I have ever watched anybody perform. 3 ruled lines at the bottom of 4 pages. I had been unable to put anything on 3 lines for 18 months. And I want to be exact about why, because it was never that I could not find the words. It was that anything true I put on those lines would arrive in a net house and be read out to about 15 people, and that one of them would be a woman who had sold a share in a boat, and I had spent a year and a half unable to hold that picture in my head for as long as it takes to write a line. What I put on them was that I had been last for a year and a half and had not said so, that I was 6th now and that it would probably not hold, that I have no badge and may never have one, and that they should not send anybody else here on my account until they had heard from Nia. Then I signed it, and Sorn read it standing up, and folded it, and put it in his inside pocket and said, "That is 4 pages and 3 lines, and went out to look at the town." Nia did not read it. She said she had written her own part and that mine was mine, and then she asked whether I felt better. "No," I said. "Good," she said. "That is how you know it was true." Marlowe came to the shop on Monday morning at 8:20, on foot, from the direction of the bridge, and she left the car on the far side of the road where anybody could see it. I was there. I had come off a double at 6, and I was sitting on the stairs at the back with a cup of something, and the bell over the door went, and the woman who runs the shop said, "We are not open," and then stopped saying anything at all. She had the case under her left arm. She came in 4 steps and stood in the middle of a shop floor between a rack of coal bags and a counter, and she looked at my sister, who was on the step behind the counter with the dictionary. She did not look at me. Not once, at any point in any of it, and I was 10 feet away on a staircase in a shop the size of a front room, and it is not possible to be in that space and not see somebody. She put the case on the counter and had it open 4 inches and took a badge out of the second row with 2 fingers, and she came round the end of the counter, and she pinned it on my sister. By hand, the way it is done. She had to reach up slightly because Nia is tall for 14 and was standing on a step. She got it straight. I remember that. She took a moment over getting it straight, and she used both hands to do it, and it is the only thing I have ever seen that woman do slowly. Then she closed the case and walked out of the shop, and the bell went, and that was all of it. And she did not speak from the door to the door. I have never found out why. Nobody has. there is nobody to ask, and there is no room to go to, and there is nothing written down anywhere in this country that says it happened, and my sister has a piece of metal on her coat, and there is no record of it at all, except the people who were in a shop at 8:20. Nia sat down on the step. Then she said, "Is this because of the hall?" And I said I did not know. And she said, "Is it because of the door?" And I did not know that either. Then she said the one thing I have carried since, and that I think is the only correct answer anybody has come up with. She said, "It does not matter." She said, "It is on, and she cannot take it off without coming back into this shop, and I am going to be standing here." Marine came at 10, and my sister met her at the door with the badge on and did not say anything about it, and let her get all the way to the second step before she turned round. I have never seen that woman surprised before or since. She stood in a shop and looked at a girl of 14 with a piece of metal on her coat and said nothing at all for about 6 seconds. Then she said, "Straight," and Nia said, "She used both hands," and Marine said, "She always did," and sat down on a coal bag, which is not a thing the first rank of a country does. She told us about the office while she was sitting on it. She had painted it herself over 3 evenings, and it had taken 4 coats because the wall had been done in a dark color underneath, and she said that as though it were the interesting part of the week. Then, on her way out, without any change in her voice at all, she said that in 20 years she has known that woman put 9 badges on a person who had not sat anything, and that 8 of those 9 had been the child of somebody she was angry with. I asked what the 9th was. She said she did not know, and had never asked, and that she would not be asking now, and got into the car. Soren watched all of it from the doorway of the back room with a cup in his hand, and he did not move a muscle. When it was over, he said one sentence in our language, which was that the woman had put it on straight, and he went and got his bag because the boat went at 11. I walked him down to the dock. He did not say anything on the way, and neither did I. And we went past the ironmonger and the awning where a man in a coat had stood for an hour a fortnight earlier, and I did not mention that either. At the ramp he said, "The net." I said, "It is in 2 pieces over a door across the river." He said, "Whose door?" I said, "Hers, the woman who owns the hall." He thought about that for a while and said, "That is not a bad place for it," and got on the boat. 6th out of 31 and a badge on a 14-year-old that nobody in this country can explain. A letter of 4 pages and 3 lines going north on the 11 o'clock. 61 households who had never once asked me to guarantee anything. The examiner still in that town on the Monday, with nothing left of mine that she had not already taken and 1 week of term to go. Dael ran it again on the Thursday, because she had 1,100 people who could not get in the first time, and because, by her own account, she had spent 30 years waiting to be a woman with a thing that sells out twice. A full house again, and 60 standing at the back, and this time, there were people in that room from 4 days up the coast, and a row near the front that Sella said afterwards was the closest that country ever comes to putting all of its numbers in one place. The 2 halves of my net were up over the doors of her hall by then, on brackets she had made for them, and every one of those 2,000 people walked in underneath. Nia came with her badge on, and Dael put her on the steps at the side with a page and a pencil and had Booth call the waits to her, because Booth had said, once, on the Tuesday, that a man calling waits should not also be remembering them, and Dael forgets nothing that a room might one day enjoy. Hesta was there with all of our year, in the 6th row, because Dael had given them the seats, and because Hesta had told them it was an examination and that she would be asking afterwards. Nobody argued with her about it, which was new. Sennett came round to the pit steps beforehand and asked me, straight out and in front of about 9 people, whether it was true that the woman with the case had walked past me on the front steps of the academy and not opened it. I said yes. She said, "So she has been thinking about you for 3 weeks," and went back to her seat. And I stood there with a bucket for a while, because Sennett had just said out loud a thing I had spent 3 weeks not letting myself have. We went up at 8:10. 9 off the North Road again, and cleaner than the first night because we had done it once, and the lamp went at 9, and 2,000 people sat in the dark, and this time about half of them had been told to expect it, and it made no difference at all. He called 420 on the 4th bag and got a laugh, which had not happened on the Thursday, and he did not understand it, and looked round for a while to see what had gone wrong. At 9:20, with the room still up on its feet, Marlowe came down the side aisle with the case under her left arm. I was standing on the boards at the front of the stage with a bucket in my hand and my coat off. I did not move. There was nowhere to go and nothing to do, and I had learned that much in a car park by a bridge 3 weeks earlier. She came up the steps at the side and across the stage and stopped in front of me, and 2,000 people went so quiet that I could hear a man in the 11th row telling somebody to sit down. She put the case on the boards. She opened it about 4 inches, and then she took a badge out of the 2nd row with 2 fingers and she pinned it on my chest, by hand, standing up in front of every person in that room. She got it straight. She used both hands to do it, the same as she had done in a shop over a counter 3 days earlier, and it took her about as long, and she was the only person in that hall who was not hurrying. That is the thing I had come to this country for. 2 years, 61 households, 2 collections, 18 months at the bottom of a list, a scale that could not find what I broke off a block. And it took about 4 seconds, and a woman I had spoken to once through a car window. Then she spoke. First and only time. in this entire account, from a corridor in the middle of a term to a stage with the room full, and she has a low flat voice and she does not raise it and she did not need to. She said, "You will not be seen with the first rank again." Then she said, "And you will not put your hands on a net in this country for as long as you wear that." 2 sentences. No paper, no signature, nothing written anywhere in front of 2,000 witnesses who all heard exactly the same words and not one of whom could ever prove they had. And I understood, standing there, that this was not cruelty and had never been. She had watched a hall full of people boo her out into the street, and she had gone away and worked out the only arrangement in which the machine could survive me, and she had come back and offered it. And it was a good offer, and by the standards of that country it was generous. Room did not make a sound. 2,000 people sat and waited for a boy with a bucket in his hand to say thank you to a woman who had just given him the only thing he had ever wanted in that country. I put the bucket down. Then I took the badge off my chest, which is harder than it looks, because the pin is stiff when it is new, and my hands were not good, and it took me about 6 seconds, and every one of those 6 seconds happened in front of everybody. Then I put it into her hand and closed her fingers over it, and she let me, which I have thought about a great deal since and have never got to the bottom of. Not on the boards, not back in the case. Into her hand, because a thing that is put on by hand comes off by hand, and I had spent 3 weeks learning that in a country that has never once said it out loud, and if that was the only sentence I was ever going to get to make, I was going to make it properly. And I said the only words I ever said to that woman in my life, and I had not planned them, and I did not have anything else ready. I said, "I would rather have the nets." She looked at me for about a second and a half, which is the same second and a half she gives everybody in a doorway. Then she closed the case and turned round and went back down the steps and along the side aisle. Nobody booed her that night. That is what I want on the record more than anything else. 2,000 people watched her the whole length of that aisle in complete silence, and she went out through the door into the street with a badge in her fist. And there is not one thing anybody could ever write down about it. And then, in the middle of that silence, with the woman with the case not yet out of the building, Marine stood up in the 9th row. She has never in 20 years been on a stage in this country. Her face is on the wall of an academy in a helmet, and her name is in a promise that 400 people make every summer, and not one of them has ever seen her in a room. She came down the aisle at her one length of step. She came up the side steps and across the boards, and she stood next to me at the front of that stage with 2,000 people watching and about 9 of the numbers of this country, with her car keys in her right hand. She said nothing about the badge, nothing about the woman either, or the price, or the nets, and she has never said anything about any of it from that evening to this one. She said Halvir, the whole of it, out loud, into a room of 2,000 people, as exactly one person in that country has ever managed on a first attempt. And then she said, "I am parked outside, take your time." And she said it in exactly the voice she uses in a car park at 6 in the morning when she has been sitting there for 20 minutes. I have been asked what that was supposed to mean, and the answer is that it was not supposed to mean anything. She was parked outside. She is always parked outside. She is never less than 20 minutes early. And she went onto a stage in front of the ranked strength of a country to say the most ordinary sentence she owns, which is the only way a person like that can ever say the other thing, and everybody in that hall heard it, including the 9 numbers in the 3rd row, and including her son. Dael went up the ladder about 4 minutes later, while the room was still making the noise it had started making when his mother said that, which was not applause, and had not got round to being applause yet. Nobody asked him to, and nobody knew he was going to. He went out of the 11th row and up the aisle and out through the doors at the back, and the first anybody knew of it was one of Odil's men shouting that there was somebody on the front ladder. Got up to the brackets over the doors of that hall in his good coat in front of a full house, and he took the 2 halves of my net off them with his hands, one at a time, and he did not do it well, and he nearly went off the ladder on the second one. Then he carried them down the aisle over his arm the way a man carries a coat, and up the side steps and across the boards, and put both of the halves into my arms in front of the whole room. He said, "I took it off you in the winter." He said it out loud, in a hall, to 2,000 people who had not asked him for it and most of whom had no idea what he was talking about. Then he said, "It took 2 of us on a ladder and I was on the ground." Pim, who was in the 4th row because Odile had given our year seats for the evening, said his name. Not one's boy, not the other thing. She said Dael out loud across 4 rows of a full hall, which she had never once done in the whole time I had been in that building, and it went round that room in seconds. He stood on a stage in a good coat and got called by his own name in front of the entire country. And it is the closest thing to a punishment and a pardon arriving in the same second that I have ever watched happen to anybody. Did not say anything back to her. He went down the steps and up the aisle to the 11th row and sat down next to his sister, and Sela did not look at him and did not say anything either, and about a minute later she put her hand flat on his arm for a moment and took it off again. That is all that family does. I have eaten at their table about 40 times since, and I have never once seen more than that. And it is not coldness, and it took me most of a year to stop reading it as coldness. His mother did not go back to her seat. She stayed on the stage at the side out of the light with her keys in her hand until the room had finished, and then the 3 of us went out through the front doors under the empty brackets and across the road to the car. Hesta came round to the back afterwards. She looked at the 2 halves of the net on the table and pushed one of them with a finger and said it was not repairable and that I would have to make another one. She said, "Well done, Halv." In my language that word is half of something and it always will be. And she is the only person in that country who ever managed to say it as though it were a whole thing. And she went on saying it for as long as I knew her. Sela got her invitation on the Monday, 4 years second, and a card at last and a chair at the senior table where the numbers eat. She went. She told me afterwards that the food was cold, that a man had explained her own record to her for half an hour and that she had left at 9:30. And she said she was going again next month. She said it without any embarrassment whatever and put the towel around her neck, and that is the last thing Sela Stroud ever said to me about anything that mattered. Corvin wrote to Moraine about the office. He suggested in the letter that the chair had been his mother's and might be returned. She had thrown it out at the road on a Saturday 5 weeks earlier, and somebody had taken it away within the hour, and he had walked past it twice on his way up that drive. Booth had the norm on the board on Friday and said we were 11 under and that the North Road was down to 6 a sweep now, which is normal for a site in its second month. I asked him whether he had enjoyed the haul. He thought about it for a while and said the floor had held. Mia goes in after the summer. She has a badge that nobody in this country can explain, and she has never sat anything, and about once a fortnight somebody asks her about it, and she says she used both hands and does not tell them any more than that. I am not ranked. There is nothing on my chest. There is nothing written down about me anywhere in this country, and a woman with a case is carrying one badge about with my name attached to nothing at all. She has never come back, and I do not expect her to. I still do the sweeps. 420 is still the norm, and it will be the norm when I am 50, and I am on 3. And the difference now is that on a good week, there are people at the fence at the North Road site who have come out from the town to watch, which Booth finds inconvenient and has said so 4 times. Moraine is in that office most evenings with the door open and one chair in it. She has never put anything back in that room. She has never explained why she wanted it either, and I stopped needing that explained about a fortnight after she got it. And I have got my name back off a class of 31, all of it, which is what I actually came out of that country wanting, and I did not know it until the morning it happened. On the Monday morning, Pim stood on the 3rd step of the entrance hall with about 100 people in it and read out 31 names from memory. She got a boy called Resum wrong on purpose about halfway down, and 19 people corrected her, which is still the record. Then she got to the end of the 20s and the end of the teens and the end of the single figures, and she took a breath and she said Halvir at the top of a list of 31 in front of the entire year. She put the stress on the second half. It goes on the first. I have been in that country 3 years now and she is still doing it, and I have never once corrected her, and I am not going to.
So that is all of it. A boy came to a country that measures people with a piece of metal, and he could not be measured. And for 18 months he let that stand as the truth about him, because he could not bear to write it down. What changed was never the metal. He put a bucket on its side, he held a door, he said a name out loud in a hole in a stage, and a room full of people did the arithmetic in public until the room was louder than the machine. Then he gave the badge back with his own hands. And what it leaves is small and hard. What a person is good at is not the same as what a person is worth, and nobody is ever going to pin that difference on you for you.